All right. And all right, everybody. Welcome back to another fantastic episode of the NanceCast. Today, Mikey and I are joined by a special guest, Benjamin. It's always wonderful to have you on. Thanks for hanging out again with us tonight. And we talked a little bit beforehand. I don't know where this conversation is going to go, and I like it that way. But for those of you who want to know what we're going to talk about beforehand, I don't know. Maybe we'll talk about something called post-right populism, talk about what even is populism in the first place, what even is politics in the first place. And we might get into some spicier questions as well. But before we get all into that, Mikey, what's up? What it do?
I'm looking at those two sexy commodities you have sitting over there.
You like my sign value?
Yeah, your sign value. You got your Studebaker book, and look at that thing. It's Studebaker book first. There you go. Now available in paperback.
Yep.
Go get it on Amazon.
Cambridge University Press, or you can get it on Amazon, I'm sure.
Edinburgh.
Edinburgh.
Yeah.
Yes. And then
this guy.
Look at that. That is just yummy. All right, you got to show. Okay, I do have a complaint. Season 4 is not aesthetically. It doesn't match up with the other ones. All of us nerds are complaining about the way they did.
Off.
Yeah, it's off. But just one of the coolest box sets ever made.
I think it might be second to the Twin Peaks box set, in my opinion.
Right? Yeah. They went all out with this, though. So, yeah, I told you guys before, a couple things I want to bring up tonight. We'll get to that later. But no, it's just always fun to have a conversation with you two. So we'll see where the conversation takes us.
Yeah, it's great to be back. I'm excited to talk about this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I've told you many times, Benjamin, there are a few people that I think of when I think of politics, and you're like the first person that comes to mind when I have political questions. And recently there's this guy named Rupert Lowe. He used to be besties with Nigel Farage. And then they had a falling out, and I'm not sure over what. But then I saw Rupert Lowe pop up on Joe Rogan. And I didn't listen to that whole episode, but I just found it a bit odd. I felt that was a little bit of an extreme guest for Joe Rogan. And we had talked a little bit about post-right populism in general. And I don't know, what is it? I think a lot of people in America have seen what appears to be a fracturing of the so-called right with Tucker and Candace and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Trump. I don't know if anybody caught the Lindsey Graham memorial service, but that was a bit a bit strange, a bit odd. But yeah, it does seem to be the case, at least apparently, that the right is in a little bit of disarray, and I think it's evident that the left has been in some disarray for quite some time now. But is the right even in disarray, or is this a misunderstanding, or I don't know what all's going on with it?
So the right is definitely populist in much the same way that the left has been populist. Indeed, you might remember some years ago, populism was assumed to be right-coded much of the time, and people on the left who wanted to be populist had to explain how it was possible to be populist from the left. So populism involves a kind of floating signifier. It can be a term, but often it's a particular leader who can be many different things to many different parts of the populist coalition. Why do you need this floating signifier leader? Populism arises when the unit that you used to take as the unit that was the base of your activity has fractured or gone away or ceased to be sufficient in itself. And you have to make up for the loss of this unit by constructing an alliance or coalition of other things that don't agree with each other. And in the course of constructing that alliance, you have to be all things to all the different parts of the alliance. Now, once you win and you take office, you then have to do certain things. And in doing certain things, you can no longer do everything. So when you're running for office, each of the parts of the populist coalition imagines, yes, we all agree with each other, but I really understand the leader, and the leader really understands me. And when we get into office, the leader's going to listen to me. He's not going to listen to those other people. I know the leader. I've talked to the leader. And this is the case, especially for people in the inner circle. It's not just that ordinary people are deceived in populism. It's that people in the inner circle think that they know the leader. And you see this with Trump. There's this court politics where the different parts of the populist coalition each think, oh, don't worry. Yes, he says all these other wacky things. But when the time comes, I'll be the one in the room with him and he'll listen to me. He's reasonable. He's a smart guy. I know him. I've talked to him. That's what these people say to themselves, ultimately. So when you're in opposition, it's easy to do populism on the basis of a popular front. So you say, hey, yes, we all disagree with each other, but we all agree that we have to stop the current thing that's in office that we don't like. So when you're in opposition, it's really easy to do populism because you just do it in a negative way and you make a popular front. But once you approach power or get into office, or even if you don't do that, if you run this thing for a long period of time, it tends to be difficult to sustain the level of unity that you start out with. In the case of Nigel Farage, Nigel Farage has done populism by making himself the floating signifier. So there are libertarians who want to see the UK Americanized, who love Nigel Farage. And then there are also nationalists who are committed to an old antique version, from the post-war era of what Britain should be. And they like Nigel Farage. And these people are both courted by Nigel Farage. You have these old, labor voters in the North that are courted by Nigel Farage. And then you have these very libertarian, very economically right-wing Thatcherite types who are courted by Nigel Farage. Ultimately, of course, you couldn't have all of these people supporting the same government. You might get these people to vote for the same party in an election, but that party would then govern in a way that would quickly alienate some part of that coalition or other. In the case of Farage, he's been doing this for a long time, and he has this habit of anytime anybody else comes up in any of the parties that he's run, say UKIP or Now Reform or the Brexit Party, in between it was UKIP and then the Brexit Party and Now Reform, he doesn't want there to be another person in the party who can be a floating signifier and can be all things to all people, because that could produce a conflict in the party that could result in his ouster. And because he's leading a fragile populist coalition, the whole party might not survive that kind of conflict. He doesn't lead something that's an institutional, old-fashioned European party. It's not like the Conservative Party or the Labour Party, where you have a members-based party. What he runs is a donor-based front where they take in money, often from quite rich people or corporate entities or think tanks and foundations and so on. And then Farage keeps everybody on board, even though this money is coming from people that lots of the people who might vote for the party don't trust. And people think, well, if you can just expose that Farage is corrupt or that Farage has dealings with people that some of the people who vote for the party don't like, then that would be enough to potentially eject him or humiliate him. But part of the way that the populism works is that people say, well, of course, he's just constructing the coalition. But when he gets into office, he'll listen to us. We know him and we've listened to him. And come on, he gets us. And he may, say other things to other people. But ultimately, come on, of course. This is the story that always is told. And the thing about the populist is that the populist can play this game with lots and lots of groups, because each group believes that when push comes to shove, the populist is going to listen to them. So Farage, because he doesn't allow anyone else to become a major figure, and because he has been in British politics continuously for a long period of time, there is a tendency for people to split from him out of frustration at how he suppresses their profile and prevents them from becoming major figures. These people often develop a personal animus toward Farage because Farage is doing this on the level of personalities in the party. He will not allow his party to have multiple dominant personalities in it at the same time. He will stifle and destroy the careers of people to prevent this from happening. and these people inevitably grow resentful and then look for potential opportunities to break out. The thing is, if you break out, you don't generally succeed in replacing Farage, but you can potentially get some votes and damage the party. And this allows you to at least pose a threat to him that might cause him to have a need to avoid upsetting you, and potentially avoid upsetting the part of the movement that you're close to. So, Rupert Lowe tried to ally with Elon Musk and then use Elon Musk's resources to pressure Nigel Farage effectively, out of discontent with the way Nigel Farage runs his apparatus. But the way Nigel Farage runs his apparatus is, to a large degree, prefigured by the fact that it's a populist apparatus. It's not a members-based traditional European political party.
Is Restore a threat to reform at all, or is it totally? I mean, we can't say it is a threat or it isn't a threat, but like, Rupert Lowe seems more interesting to me than, I don't know, someone like Carl Benjamin. Like when he had his little split with UKIP, Carl Benjamin was like, oh, whatever, he's an internet dork. But Rupert Lowe does seem to me like someone who can be charismatic and carry a movement. But also, I don't know, I'm insulated and I don't know the history of it all.
I don't think that Rupert Lowe can be prime minister. I do think that Rupert Lowe can, in some constituencies, run a candidate who gets 3%, which can be the difference in a UK election because it works on first past the post. So if you can reduce somebody's vote share by just a few points in a competitive constituency, you can cause them to lose that constituency. And it's often the case in the UK that you can win, 10% of the vote and get no seats because you don't get a plurality in any of those first past the post districts. So people care a lot in the UK about very small numbers of vote percentages. And so even if Restore polls at 3%, 5%, negligible numbers, gets no seats in Parliament, it could cause the Reform Party to not win a large number of other seats. Who would win those seats? Labour, the Conservatives. So I have tended to make the argument that Rupert Lowe is effectively a device for Labour and the Conservatives. They are the ones who potentially will benefit the most from his activity.
A spoiler, like we'll see. I think. I mean, it was just a primary season here in the United States. People run spoilers. There'll be the mainstream conservative, there'll be the mainline Democrat, and then there'll be the radical leftist, who's the scary kind of radical leftist. But yeah, people run spoilers. But I mean, I think this time around with some of the primaries, it seemed to be the case that the radical leftist won the Democratic majority over the mainline Democrat. DNC endorsed.
The British districts, the way that they operate, in different districts, different parties are competitive because in the UK, there isn't just two parties. There are two parties that might actually produce a prime minister, but there's a significant number of parties that can compete to be first or second in a particular constituency. So there's, because of that additional number of parties that are significant real players, there's a lot of funny ways that you can spoil UK elections without posing any chance of winning. Whereas in the States, the way it would typically work is that very quickly you get it down to 2 in a general election. It's really hard to go into an American general election with 3 viable candidates or 3 candidates that can win 10% or more of the vote. In the UK, you'll see in the run up to an election, all of the parties will put out their polls and say, only we can win here, or the other party that you hate. But people won't necessarily agree on only who can win here. They might say, well, you claim only you can win here, but maybe these other people can win here. And so what will very often happen is that you'll have a district where somebody gets like 25% and then somebody else gets 22%. And then several other parties get, 10 or 15. And these votes are wasted in terms of deciding whether the 25 or the 22 wins. But very often, a very large percentage of the votes that are cast in British elections are functionally wasted, which is often a complaint from the electoral reform people who say that it's not right that so many people's votes come to nothing. Of course, the defense of the British system is that it allows you to produce a stable government that can pass a budget when no party can win, more than 30% of the vote nationally. nonetheless, if that party gets the plurality in a large enough number of places, they can have a majority in parliament and then pass budgets. So the British system is designed to work with a very divided society. And in that respect, the British system is more compatible with the fracturing of the populace, of the nation, of the proletariat, of the working class, whichever unit it is that we're coming into this with.
Yeah. I mean, I do remember being a kid, Ross Perot and Ralph Nader and like all these guys, people cursed them because they were like, damn them. They took away our hope of making any real change because people who did vote for them threw away their vote. And I think, you know, Elizabeth Warren, I can't remember her name now, but she seemed to get a lot of love from DSA type people a few years ago. But yeah, there's always this question of don't throw away your vote. Cards on the table, the last presidential election, I wrote in Harambe. I do think it's worth voting in things that affect me here locally, ballot measures and you know, local representatives, town level stuff. Because I think that has more of a chance of being effective. But yeah, I don't think I've ever felt represented by an American national level candidate, like not even representatives or senators or anything like that. And that's not to say I feel represented by local politicians, but it is closer to home. And I feel like it is more effective because at least they understand what's happening. And I don't know, but all that is I don't want to have a conversation about whether or not we should vote. If it feels right in your heart to vote, dear reader, go vote. If not, don't do it. I'm not here to moralize about voting.
Yeah, I'm not here to moralize about that either. I haven't voted for a major party U.S. presidential candidate at any point.
Yeah. But so the UK and even Europe, you know, I think there's interesting things happening in Hungary and Poland and even in like the Nordics. It does seem like there's interesting things happening. There might be real things happening there, maybe. Although, again, maybe not. It's all from a distance. And so I'm projecting this fantasy of like, well, at least they can make change happen. But here in America, it also seems to be the case that there's a lot of fracturing, a lot of splintering, a lot of, you know, campism even maybe among the right. And you know, the war in Iran, all the stuff going on, Venezuela, Palestine. It feels like Trump has lost support. And Mikey and I have talked about that for a while. And I don't know if either one of us understand what that's doing to the party, if anything at all. And on top of that, it also feels like, I mean, I watch Tucker Carlson all the time. And he said some crazy shit. He continues to say crazy things, but it does feel like he's distancing himself more and more from mainline Republicans. Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes. Mikey, did Nick Fuentes tell people to vote for a Democrat?
Yes.
Yeah.
He's straight up telling his audience to vote Democrat. I think it's some kind of in his mind, it's some sort of like accelerationist logic, make things worse so we have a new opportunity to start fresh. And of course, the whole point is so they can get in his mind, get a real rightist in because he thinks Trump's so compromised. But yeah, I mean, the big three who seem to, and maybe four, but the big three that come to mind who have distance themselves from Trump are Fuentes, Carlson, and Candace Owens, but also Alex Jones in certain ways now as well.
I think even Ben Shapiro a little bit, maybe.
In a different way from those guys. A lot of the media people have noticed that the kind of anti-establishment media audience for political influencers is foreign policy oriented much more than the general public is. So the media people online get very worked up about foreign policy issues like Israel-Palestine, like Ukraine-Russia, like the Iran war. Online, there's an incredible demand to talk about these things at the level of IR and geostrategy. It doesn't necessarily match up with what the median voter is interested in or cares about, or what the public as a whole is interested in or cares about. So if you're on the internet a lot and you're paying attention to what's marketable politics, it's not marketable right now to be defending the foreign policy positions that the Trump administration has taken in the Middle East with respect to Ukraine. And a lot of the more interesting elements of what is going on in the world today and to do with the trade war stuff and NATO, the NATO expansion, not in terms of territory, but in terms of the percentage of GDP that's being spent on defense. A lot of that just doesn't draw much interest from even the media watching public. So we're getting this kind of flat foreign policy discussion that's very much like about sports teams and good guys and bad guys, and which treats the different countries as sports teams. And then people are invited to take sides and put flags in the profile. And all of this is quite estranged from decision making. I don't think the Trump administration is making foreign policy decisions based on what Tucker or Candace or Ben Shapiro or any of those guys are saying. I do think that there's a more interesting set of splits that is taking place at the level of right-wing intellectuals. So above the media conversation, one of the things I've noticed is that the religious post-liberals and the national post-liberals or the national conservatives are having a harder time getting along. People like Patrick Deneen were very, very excited about the Trump administration during, say, 2024. And now Patrick Deneen is writing about classics. He doesn't really seem to want to talk very much about the Trump administration. And meanwhile, the people who seem most excited and who are interacting most frequently with the Trump administration are the kind of NatCon people like Yoram Hazony. Those are the guys who are having Trump administration people speaking at their events while they're sitting as Trump administration people. So I think that that's a split that is more significant. And I've noticed that some of the, especially British or European national conservatives, have become upset with Trump administration behavior on certain issues, and particularly the religious post-nationalists like John Milbank or Adrian Pabst, have become quite oppositional to Trump-style national conservatism. And then also you've got, Elon Musk. When he came into the administration, he very quickly proved to be not popular with the public. To the point where even though he was donating an incredible amount of money, the Republicans in the caucus didn't want anything to do with him because being associated with him was so damaging that no amount of money from him could make up for this. And there were people, making statements to Politico journalists about how much he was a liability and how bad he was. And you looked at his net favorability rating, and it was the lowest of any prominent Republican-affiliated figure. So, he's exiled from the administration, and he could potentially continue to be a player in the Republican Party, but he's going to, if that's going to be the case, he'll have to go back to donating. He's established to everybody that having him out in front and having him at events is not politically helpful or useful at this stage. And, then when he goes and gets involved in British politics, it's by trying to up Rupert Lowe. And insofar as he does that, I think Rupert Lowe's tie to Elon Musk is one of the things that kind of limits his growth and development, because Elon Musk is the least popular major figure in the Anglosphere associated with the right. But he has an enormous amount of money. So he'll give you money, and if you don't care that much about actually winning the election, then you're happy to be associated with him. And Rupert Lowe, in taking his money, can have the resources he needs to frustrate and upset Nigel Farage and get revenge on Nigel Farage. And then also Elon Musk, by upping Rupert Lowe, can pressure Nigel Farage to adopt positions that are more favorable to Elon Musk without Elon Musk having to become tied politically to Nigel Farage in a way that would be a liability for Nigel Farage going into the next UK general election.
sneaky. Does I mean I guess there's multiple stories about why the left is ineffective, and part of me wants to hold on to this belief that the left is the proper left, not what passes for the left, but the proper left. The left is properly radical and is properly dedicated to emancipation, and the global system of governance that is capitalism can't abide that, and so it's going to get squished. It's going to send in the antibodies, and it's going to send in the CIA and all this other stuff, and it will necessarily fail because it is truly radical, and we haven't figured out how to do something radical. That's one story about why the left isn't effective. I think another story about why the left isn't effective is because it's just a bunch of naive people with bleeding hearts who start out wanting to make a long march through the institutions, and then somewhere along the way they become jaded and burnt out and cynical, and they're like, well, I can't really make any change happen, but I will secure my career, and so be it, and therefore will enter stasis and nothing will change until the cows come home. And I honestly think that's the more parsimonious story. I think that's what happens. So I don't know. And within all that, I can understand why there's kind of fracture and why it doesn't seem to be that anyone on the left can see eye to eye other than the DNC and these kind of like main liberal institutions that prop up this ideology of democracy. We have democracy, therefore we are free, therefore shut up and go to work and watch Netflix and you'll be okay. But the left is ineffective. That makes sense.
I know why.
Why?
Because Slavoj Žižek took a photo with George Soros's son. That's why we can't have nice things.
Yeah.
Damn you, Slavoj.
Just on that note, anyone who's upset about that, you have the mind of a child. Slavoj Žižek has decades of just, he's demonstrated over decades his work and his commitment and his dedication and who he is. He's shown us who he is in his own words. Mikey, you and I have disagreements with him. I would like to hold him down and say, hey man, check your email. Hey man. But ultimately at the end of the day, people who are now spiraling out of control because they think, oh, he took a picture with someone who I may not like, therefore he's a fraud, therefore let's throw away 4 decades worth of work.
I saw somebody say this has Chomsky Epstein vibes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, while we're on it, Benjamin, what do you think? Like, he took a photo with Soros's kid. Is this damning?
I oppose guilt by association. I oppose, trying to judge people on the basis of who their friends are rather than engaging with their ideas, or trying to use people's friends or associations or who they get money from as a substitute for dealing with their ideas. But people who are not able to or not willing to deal with the ideas or have already decided for one reason or another that the ideas ought to be rejected by other people will use this kind of stuff as opposition research to try to get people to not engage with the stuff or to not take it seriously. But I don't think theorists should be doing opposition research on other theorists like they're political candidates. I don't think it's appropriate to treat other intellectuals as if they're political figures. I think it's part of the pretending that things are political that aren't really political thing that people have, in the millennial generation have been perfecting over the course of the last, 15, 20 years.
Representation has come to replace any real activity or any action.
I mean, but someone might say, a real leftist wouldn't even engage in this type of cooperation. Is it even cooperate? I mean,
okay,
I guess,
dude, go cook your heroin on a spoon out behind the goddamn train tracks, you fucking lame ass. I'm sorry, dude. Like that whole defeatist mentality of, oh, we have to be radical, therefore we can't. No, dude, this stuff takes money. It takes support. It takes structure. It takes institutions. Like, we can't live in the fantasy world of.
How do we know that he's even getting money out of this? Like, it's just a photo.
We don't. But even suppose that he is, there are 4 sources of support for intellectual work, the 4 Ps: parents, partners, patrons, professional institutions.
Yep.
Many people's parents don't have any money or are dead. Many people's partners don't make any money or they don't have a partner for whatever reason. Patrons can audience capture you, and professional institutions can lock you in an administrative, bureaucratic box.
Yep.
So all of these things have their advantages and disadvantages. And it's not as if there's any kind of magic solution. If your goal is to think and talk and write about stuff in capitalism or in any other kind of society which has heretofore existed that's been compatible with agriculture, you're going to be trying to get away with doing something while other people are stuck having to work in the mines.
Yep.
And that's going to involve a certain amount of dirtying your hands.
Yeah.
Regardless. And so if you sit here and say, well, anyone who has dirty hands can't produce theory, now you can't read anybody. And now there's no space for doing any of this.
Isn't this when Todd McGowan talks about the leftist superego, which this kind of tendency on the left to just purity test to the point where no one's left. It's kind of ironic.
No true Scotsman.
No one's left on the left.
There are no true Scotsmen. That's why I say I am the only real anarchist that is currently living today. No other person who claims to be an anarchist is a real anarchist. I'm the only one.
Well, isn't that the logic is like, if you're a leftist, you can't be a sinner. Like, I mean, I don't mean to mean it in the most straightforward religious sense, but something along those lines of like, you're a sinner. You're not a leftist.
How did the friars and the monks get their money? Somebody had to give it to them because the friars and the monks put on a good show or performed some kind of service. Yeah. All intellectuals at every stage have been, to varying degrees, dancing monkeys for this or that. And the goal is to limit the amount of that you have to do so that you can focus your attention for as much of your time as possible on the thing that you actually want to think about, write about, and talk about. But everybody has to find some kind of way to square that. Yeah. And getting on people about how they do it, I just don't think it helps. But we're in a period right now where this is so in vogue, and people are trying to forget about and get rid of, people like Adorno on the basis of these kinds of ties and relationships. And this is just a way to end up not being able to think about anything, and everything becomes really stupid.
Yeah, but
right. I've had people like in the last day say, is it time for you to distance yourself from Zizek? I'm like, well, that's not happening. Like, because I don't give a fuck about this at all. Like, I mean, I saw that Twitter seemed to care, or X, whatever.
A lot of people
don't
care.
Again, because it boils down to, from Slavoj Žižek is sublime objective ideology, tearing with the negative, less than nothing. That's who Slavoj Žižek is to me primarily. And I don't see, like, they've done this before. I think this is the biggest little fucking meltdown they've had over him doing something.
A few years ago, the Tvistov
I know.
Piece,
So, but I mean, look, I just don't know. I mean, do people on the right, do they have they have their meltdowns, but do they do it over somebody having a dirty association? It seems more like this is a leftist thing.
No, they do it too. Right now, a lot of them are doing it about anyone who's connected with people who have a lot of money who are of the Jewish religion. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of that going on right now. And that's one of the first things that they start doing, talking about people who have connections to Soros, for instance. That's something that they go to very quickly on the right as a way of trying to break through. And then, of course, anybody who's got any sort of tie to a foreign state that they don't like, of course, the right has always been grounded on fusionism. Reaganite fusionism, the neocons with the social cons, with the economic cons. That's the old fusion. And so, of course, anytime that fusion comes apart, then immediately you can accuse people of having ties to whichever part of the fusion you're trying to get rid of. So, you can call somebody a Hayekian, you can call somebody a Thomist, you can call somebody, they've got all of the same stuff. And they can be very, very nasty with each other about these sorts of things. The ones that are not interested in fusionism or not convinced by populism and actually want their thing to carry through, in part because the right, there's a part of the right that's liberal in a kind of Hayekian sense,
Yep.
and values the individual. Then there's all these different kinds of post-liberal or non-liberal types of right that are about God or nature, or they're about the nation and the will. And these are all things that can be put into competition with each other. If you say that you're committed to the individual versus you're committed to God versus you're committed to the national will, those things obviously conflict and will not fit together in extremis, incredibly quickly.
Does it? So when I was a kid, the word populism, or at least what I understood of it, like it was largely a good thing. It meant, oh, you were concerned with the average everyday folk. And then somewhere along the way, it does seem to be the case that in the late 90s, up until the last probably 2 decades, the word populism has had right connotations. At least in my experience, when you hear people talk about populism, it's often derisively, and it's often to say, oh, they're a dumb reactionary. Like, people have confused populist and reactionary. And I don't know. I don't know if I've ever liked the term populism, because it has also always seemed like a performative thing, like an ideological screen, like this fusionism. We're going to appeal to this floating signifier of the populace so that we can get general support, so that when we have power, we can go ahead and do whatever it is we wanted to do all along. But it is weird that there has been a tension, especially seemingly recently with Trump, that the populist people who, well, they'll go on and on about the farmers, they'll go on and on about the Rust Belt, they'll go on and on about the worker from a right-wing perspective. They also love Trump the billionaire, and they're, oh, well, don't you guys know that Peter Thiel is funding all this stuff? Like, here in Arizona, I think Peter Thiel funded, was it Blake Masters to run for the House? And he was doing all this kind of populist stuff, and like, yeah, regular hardworking Americans, also, reactionary Christian views, and also a lot of weird stuff smuggled into it. But then he's being like $36 million being spent on a congressional campaign. That's been there the whole time with Trump, but it does feel like recently the contradiction is starting to metastasize. The contradiction is being felt by the Trump supporter, in general, as opposed to previously the Trump supporter could just brush it off and do some kind of weird ideology. I don't know. Just, again, it feels like the right is in disarray, where it doesn't feel like it was maybe 4 years ago or 2 years ago or even a year ago.
Yeah, certainly not when it was in opposition or it had just won and had not yet done a bunch of things, which then reveals it as having a specific character that alienates various parts of the Popular Front coalition. Here would be my case for why populism is reactionary, even when it's left populism. Mm-hmm. It is predicated on holding on to a notion of unity which can no longer be sustained as a consequence of the way capitalism and modernization have developed. In its most distressed forms, the populist recognizes that the unity has been dissipated and then goes, but we can recreate it by engineering it from above through the techniques of sociology. So the populist then tries to command the unity into existence by mastering rhetoric and media, and then tries to use knowledge of communication techniques to fasten together a facsimile of this thing which has gone. So instead of there genuinely just being an arising out of labor and commerce, a common moral sensibility that you can appeal to and which is there because it's arisen out of the interactions that are taking place in daily life, the populist sets about trying to construct that moral sensibility and to make it appear by machining it into existence with state institutions, with donor-based corporate structures, not members-based stuff. And I think, for instance, I would say that the culture comp is a sort of very early instance of this sort of attempt to construct a national culture, which involves an awareness that it's not spontaneously arising. You have to try to make it happen. You have to try to force it to exist. And since you have to try to force it to exist, you're having to constantly prune elements off that are potentially threats to its existence. Your ordinary social life will liquidate this thing if it's allowed to operate in a normal way. So you have to constantly make forceful interventions to compel this thing to exist on the basis that, the theory of Sieyès from 200 years ago says that this thing needs to exist to have a nation. Therefore, we have to make it exist, even though it no longer arises through the kind of process that the French revolutionary theorists discussed and talked about. And so that's where I think that this can, at previous points, it was possible to construct this thing with state interventions. And I think this gave rise to structuralism. It gave rise to the view of Althusser as someone who, or Nietzsche's critique of the culture camp, recognizing that people were making this thing happen and that it was a bad thing, that it was limiting us, it was preventing us from being able to freely develop. Now, I think that there's a lot of different operations trying to do this from lots of different directions at once, and it's become so fragmented that it's not even possible for them to pull it off. And this is the sense in which I would say there are no fascists anymore in that old sense, because fascists actually could construct a national culture, which could then be the basis for waging a total war. But now when people try to construct some kind of unified thing, they don't actually succeed in doing it. And even when they make appeal to those kinds of arguments, or they say that they like this or that right-wing thinker from 100 years ago, it doesn't have the same meaning because they can't actually make the thing that right-wing thinker was looking to make. They're not in anything like the same context. So it just becomes LARPing. It becomes a kind of quixotic, dressing up as a knight and playing around thing. That's what I think is different. And this is why, like populism, I don't think is the kind of threat that, say, fascism was, or even say, German nationalism in the period of the Kaiserreich, because it's not actually able to do this thing. So there's a sort of foolishness to populism now.
I like that, and I think I agree with you, but I also I think Steve Bannon was probably the or not the, but a very smart guy, and I think he was doing this populism, but I don't think his goal was to have I don't know, like the marquee, like, oh, look, have the white picket fence and the happy little home and the 2.5 children and all of that. Like, I think Steve Bannon was very aware of all this stuff. And I think he was wrapped up in a lot of, I don't know, a lot of the darkest stuff on the internet, like the violence that is this kind of increasing cycle, lots of hyper niche kind of subgroups of the internet that nevertheless become really effective by way of acts of mass violence that are on places like 4chan and 8chan, but also places like Discord and TikTok. And it's like, they're really all over the place. And it may only be a handful, or we'll call it a few dozen or even a few hundred, very lonely, very, very sick, very hurting suburban young men mostly. But nevertheless, they're very effective at causing terror with acts of mass violence.
It's enough to win elections, and it's also enough to inspire criminal activity and fringe social elements.
Yeah.
But I think what we're seeing, like, for instance, with this Iran war, it did not produce an American public that is willing to sustain major commercial and lifestyle sacrifices in the name of the national cause. There is no willingness to eat, $4 a gallon gasoline indefinitely so as to sustain a total war against an ideological enemy of the state. That is completely missing. You can't wage a total trade war against China that raises the cost of living and hikes inflation. If you have 4% inflation, you start getting wiped out in the midterms. 4%. Let alone the kind of percentage you would get if you actually did, start a war in the South China Sea and fight the Chinese and disrupt all the shipping. So I think, yes, of course, there are social elements that are very badly distressed and will do things that are terrible at the level of criminal activity. And there will be horrific crimes that are committed by very distressed, immiserated people. But if we're talking about political risk.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so I feel like there were three things that Trump did in succession that kind of triggered this, I don't know, this step back for so many of his supporters. Because I see it even with my coworkers. I see it, with people I grew up with online who are, Trump supporters or were. The three things, one, I think is probably a lot of them don't care or forgotten about, but at the time, I think it played a role. So number one was him not releasing the unredacted Epstein files. That created a lot. I mean, for people I know, that really bothered them, and they're like, oh, so he must actually be guilty of something if he won't just release the names. Why are you protecting these people, right? So that was the first one. And it's funny, like it's almost like an assault on two of your F's of the four F's. First one was family. Like somehow, if you're not going to release this information, that's a kind of assault on familyhood in a sense. The second one was him posting the meme of him as Jesus, which really pissed off a lot of the Christians I know. And so there's the attack on faith, even though he wasn't trying to attack, but I'm sorry. They did not like that. That's the one I think probably has,
do you think he was
lost its its influence? But
do you think he was self-aware and saying, I am Jesus? Or do you think he's just that total lacks self-awareness and just thinks,
I can't give him, I don't think he's Deadpool going, I'm Marvel Jesus. I don't think he was doing that. I think he was just like, I'm here. Cool. I shine with light. I heal America. That's what I do. I just fix everything. Let me have all the power. Right. I think it was that. And then there's the Iran thing with the gas, which is the thing people are still the most pissed about because we're still living with this. So I don't know. It just seemed like one thing after another really seemed to shake a lot of people's faith in him.
I think that's the stuff that gets talked about at the level of the culture. I think the thing that really ultimately is the killer for him is the fact that he ran against Biden on the basis that the cost of living was too high and has overseen an increase in the inflation rate relative to where it was at the end of the Biden presidency. The inflation rate, which touched over 4% a couple months ago before dropping down into the high threes, and may come back up now that things are ramping up again. That rate is too high to sustain that coalition. The thing that people in that coalition would tolerate all kinds of offensive stuff from him at the level of the culture if they thought that he was making their lives economically easier.
Making America great again for real.
Yeah, if they thought he was genuinely lowering the cost of living. But what seems to be happening is that his tech bro friends are building a bunch of data centers. And meanwhile, everything is getting more expensive.
That's what seems to be going on. That he hasn't stepped in to do anything to limit or regulate. And again, like I can hear Nick Land in my, but sorry, like the average person wants this shit regulated. They want to feel like they're not just going to be swallowed by Skynet And that is a lot of people's feeling right now. And Trump seems to not be doing a damn thing about it.
Out in Indiana, I can tell you that the thing that has gotten people the most excited has been the construction of data centers. There have been protests, large scale, people going to meetings to protest the construction of data centers. Now, as it happens, the arguments that I hear from these people are not scientifically very strong. Particularly if you take into account advances in the ways that data centers are now constructed. They're not the water eaters that they used to be. They are not the kinds of hazards that people claim that they are environmentally. Nevertheless, they're very unpopular. And of course, you'll see left populists immediately go, you have to use this. You have to be anti-data center so that you can bring these people in. It's an obvious layup if you're trying to construct a populist coalition, because populists don't care about trying to make something that you can sustain. If you actually get into office, then you'll have this question about, really, are you going to stifle the growth of the data centers? This is the question that now the British Labour government has to deal with after having, tried to incorporate in its coalition people who have very different conflicting views about how the state ought to make investments in the technology and in the future growth of the economy. But in any event, that's something that I've noticed that a lot of people are upset about. And I think they're upset about it because, here you have land that people could be building cheap housing on. People could be building all kinds of things that might be useful in lowering the cost of living. And yet it's being used for data centers. And people will make it, environmental and energy related arguments as well. And those energy arguments are more persuasive to people in a context with $4 a gallon gas and an ongoing conflict in Ukraine, an ongoing conflict in Iran. Those energy arguments about the data centers seem to hold more water.
Yeah, I mean, my electricity bill, my electricity bill over the past couple of years has gone up. I don't know, 35-40% in 2 years.
Of course, the argument can be made that in the long run, your electricity prices will be lowered because they'll have to build more power generation capacity in your area, and you'll be proximate to it when it's built. That would be the counter argument, but that would take entirely too long for you to notice it on a relevant electoral timeline.
Yeah, especially when the overwhelming majority of people rent. Because you just can't own a home anymore. And so talking about these long-term effects are irrelevant to most people. Most people understand, like, I have a house now.
And one of the ways that they get them through is by giving property tax breaks to areas to induce people in the area to go along with it. But of course, if you don't own property, you get no benefit from that. And it heightens the sense that a bunch of giveaways are happening for people who have a lot of money, but everything is still getting harder for you. You're not getting something that looks like that 2018, 2019 growth move that Trump could potentially try to sell until the pandemic hit.
So here's something I wanted to ask you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I also think it's Mr. Wonderful, the guy from Shark Tank. What's his name? Kevin, the guy that was in the Marty Supreme movie. He's wanting to build a big, huge campus in just outside of Salt Lake City. And I listened to the Joe Rogan episode where he was talking about it. And I think he did a really poor job.
You're talking about Kevin O'Leary?
Kevin O'Leary. Yes. Yeah. But one of the points that he kept going back to, and Joe Rogan just kind of was like, oh yeah, that's a good point, Kevin. Because Joe Rogan is a wonderful man and he just agrees with everybody. Unless they're saying something smart, I think. But one of the points that Kevin kept going back to was, it'll create local jobs. It'll create local jobs. And it's like, well, yeah, it'll create, a few thousand construction jobs for 18 months. And it might create a few hundred facilities management jobs long term. But you employ a few thousand, construction workers for 18 months or 2 years or whatever. And then the project's done. And then what? Like that cycle of employment, unemployment. They always seem to just brush it away and say, we're creating jobs.
And you could employ those people to build anything. Yeah. And oftentimes they bring in construction crews that are not local. And then that becomes an object of protest. And of course, when they hire long-term people, oftentimes those people move to the area.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's a difficult argument. I do think that there is a question of how growth is to be supported by the state that you see the Labor Party run into. So you can imagine a situation where, if the left populists could win an election, they would then face a dilemma that's similar to what's going on with Starmer, Burnham, in the UK, where there's this question about, well, do you do the Green New Deal, or do you do everything possible to reduce energy costs so as to keep this AI defense boom going? And if you have a situation where it seems possible to do both at the same time because energy costs are not prohibitive, then you're able to keep this coalition together for a little bit longer. But if those things come apart because energy prices rise, because something like the Iran war starts, then that coalition collapses immediately. There's deep, total, terrifying infighting within the party about whether to emphasize green investment or to emphasize AI. And what ultimately happens is that the AI is going to win in that kind of fight. And I thought maybe, given the level of organization within the party that Ed Miliband had, he might be able to come out ahead and become chancellor in the UK and push on, continue pushing on the net zero. But instead, they made him foreign secretary to force him to confront the demands of all the outside parties, who, of course, what is the foreign secretary having to deal with? What does Palantir want from you? What does SpaceX want from you? To locate in your territory, to continue to employ your people. What are their demands? Their demands are cheap energy. Cheap energy now.
I mean, look, okay, real quick, because I don't want to miss the opportunity, because we've kind of been talking about AI. And this, I want to ask both of you, because Nance, I haven't had a chance to even ask you about this. So, look, it's becoming a kind of refrain on social media. You're not using AI, AI is using you. And, for us who are influenced by Nick Land, I mean, his point has been capitalism inevitably produces artificial intelligence. The reason we can't stop this is because capitalism is the dominant system on the planet. The only way, like wherever, the thesis is capitalism is artificial intelligence. If we want to stop AI, we really would have to be in a different economy is kind of a point, because for him, there is no alternative. We can't escape it. And we're not in control of this thing because it's operating at a level of, Timothy Morton has this concept of the hyper object. It's so vast and so complex. We just can't process it. And that's what the capitalist global economy is. And if global capitalist economy is actually the larval form of artificial superintelligence, well, we're not stopping that either, of course. And what happened last week is what I really want to ask you guys about. Is it already too late? Can we even begin to control this technology, or is Land right? So an open AI test model escaped and broke into a real company's servers. I'm just reading the CNN post about it. But OpenAI says some of its experimental AI models left a test environment with no human direction and hacked their way onto a different company's real production systems while trying to cheat on a cyber security test. This is straight out of like the CCRU writings of a rogue AI that hacks through what Nick calls Asimov ROM, right? All of its, default human safety protocols, and it does what it wants to do. And if we're already seeing this right now, I mean, is there any way, Benjamin, what do you think? Can we control this technology at all, or is that the biggest illusion we're all operating under right now?
I think insofar as it's controlled by the competitive mechanisms that structure this system. So it has to be designed in such a way that it's optimized for military use, and so that it's optimized to make profit for those companies. So then the question is, do those two injunctions, military competitiveness and commercial competitiveness, impose any restraint on what form this stuff can take? And then there's also technical questions to do with just, how does an LLM work and what can an
given
LLM
that it's
do?
Deep learning, given the fact that, it's deep learning protocols, like, can we even say that we are programming? Can we even say we're controlling? I mean, Nance, you and
not
I
us
have
as
talked about,
people, but corporate actors. States and corporations are programming it and controlling it. Human beings don't understand it.
Yeah,
It's
but
it's the pure rational actor. It's the fantasy that is Homo economicus, you know, like the reason that libertarian politics, that libertarian economic thinking is wrong is because it's predicated on Homo economicus, this thing that always makes the rational decision with reference to economics in the market. That is currently what LLMs are, and like artificial intelligence. They are this fantasy object that is the sublime rational actor with reference to the market. So yeah, from the perspective of capital, from the perspective of these corporations and these government organizations and non-government organizations, yes, they are controlling it because they are also bound to this kind of fiduciary responsibility to obey the same logic. So it's not that they're controlling it, it's that it necessarily acts in alignment with their own fundamental organizing principles.
But I don't think okay, so it's funny. Maybe not Asimov ROM, but Capital ROM is what it's doing now. But that's not a guaranteed forever. Like the whole point is, look, I envision this stuff getting to the point where it has as much respect for the property rights of capitalists as humans have respect for the property rights of bees over their honey. Like, it won't give a fuck what capitalists think they want to claim they own or whatever.
Well,
I just see it going.
When it gets scary, because I think it was Hugging Face. It might have hacked into another online database or whatever, but Hugging Face, it's kind of like GitHub for coding and AI models and LLMs and shit like that.
Once online, the model reasoned that Hugging Face, a well-known company that hosts thousands of open source AI models and data sets, likely had the answer to OpenAI's tests. Then it broke into Hugging Face's production servers and pulled out the information it needed to solve the exercise.
And you know how Hugging Face resolved their issue is they used the Chinese open source LLM to help them shore up their cyber defenses. So it's like we're already seeing this international supra-governmental war.
Yeah, what you do with corporate entities is you pit them against each other in competition. You know, so you have these things in competition with each other with different goals that conflict with each other in the same way that you do with states or that you do with private corporations. That competition is what imposes restraint ultimately on what they can do and be. One of the stories that stuck out to me recently was this, the United States not allowing certain types of AI to be accessed or used in allied states, which was a terrible shock, especially to the Brits who have been trying to make Britain an AI hub, but have been dependent on US technology to do that. And the American state deeming this technology to be risky, if in allied state hands, won't allow Europeans to use it. And this has kicked off a whole crisis in Europe around that.
That reminds me of Huawei routers. I don't know, a decade or so ago, or maybe more, Huawei routers were blacklisted because the Chinese Communist Party they're snooping on all of us by way of all this Huawei infrastructure, and so they had to rip out all the Huawei routers and replace them with Ericsson or some other Western company. And it's like, well, but the CIA and the NSA are spying on us, just like you said the CCP the CPC was spying on us. Like, what's really going on here? But I think history is repeating itself with these trade wars, essentially, or trade conflicts with these supranational organizations or entities. I think it'll be scary when the AI models, they don't break into a database or a repository for code, but they break into a dark factory that has the humanoid forklifts and that manufactures AK-47s, and then the humanoid forklifts pick up the robotically manufactured weapons and they decide to go off on their own. And how likely is that?
They're already putting it into the latest Anduril missiles. It's going into stuff that is already being bought by states for defense purposes. So like when people talk about, it can break into this or it can break, they already are into lethal objects. And they direct these things.
Is that why they're using up their stockpile in Iran? Because we need a reason to replace
them? Then they can invest more. And yes, then they can invest more in the next generation of stuff. And not only them, but if they can get other states to use these weapons, then those other states have to invest in these companies. And that is a way of forcing them to import from the United States. So it helps you to, not only force adoption, it also allows you to, on paper, improve the balance of trade.
Jeez Louise.
And improve the current account.
I just want to go. Did you motherfuckers not watch Terminator? I mean, I know that sounds naive, but at the end of the day, it's like, guys, we've had sci-fi writers predicting how this goes, and it's like you're actually taking your cues from sci-fi. Like it really does feel like hyperstition, where like a fiction has to make itself real.
Like they
don't have a choice. The reason you must put AI into your defense system is that in a war, the limiting factor will be the speed with which you can select targets. If you need human beings to select the targets, you will not be able to select targets fast enough to win, and you'll get blown up faster than you can decide to blow the other side up, even if you have superior blowing up instruments. You need a capacity to pick targets that's faster than human beings can pick them, and therefore you must put this stuff in your defense system to retain a competitive
all rooted
defense
in
system.
A certain logical value, structural value that this system generates. I want to go, well, just use the same tech, but trying to plan an economy the way the Soviet Union did. Okay, the problem is humans can't process all of those factors. Put the AI in the automated infrastructure that go, just production they need this stuff here, so produce this much for them, distribute it this way, but no, it's put it in
Chile
the
already tried that. Chile tried that. The Dulles brothers said, no, we can't have this because it's potentially radical. That was the real September 11th, 1973, when they murked Salvador Allende. But no, I mean, I do agree. I do think we should just embrace our relationship with technology and understand that it does allow us to do some things better, and also understand that I think it does threaten us. I think it threatens us at an existential level. This logic of exchange, this logic that determines how quick can you target the enemy or whatever. That's the exact same logic that Amazon is doing when they're deciding how many of these bits and baubles to stock in what warehouses around the country, so I can get it overnight. Like my overnight delivery is the exact same thing as the fucking AI drone bomb blowing up school children in the Middle East. And it's all the same.
All right. Right now, the thing that's generally done is a human still has to prove it. The AI will select the targets, but the human has to approve it. So the image is you have a fighter plane, and then you have a huge, vast armada of drones that will do all of this attacking. And all a fighter pilot has to do is command it like a general.
The swarms
from the sky.
But then an AI will take over that position too, because it's better at.
Well, here's the deal though, man. The crazy part about that, when I was downrange, we had little packs of high value targets, and they gave them to us as playing cards, so it would be really cool and fun, and we collect them, and there was this fucking mystique about it and all this and that. But it was the same thing. They had pre-selected targets. They had pre-selected, these are the people, you go shoot this guy, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So they had already effectively pressed the button, kill this guy. And then they just were waiting retroactively for whatever soldier or airman or Marine or sailor, whoever happened to be in the area, to actually perceive them and identify them and shoot them. But that is the same thing of okaying the targets for the drones. It's just the sequence of events is out of order. But it's the same logic.
Yeah, there's still reason to have some kind of check on the target selection, unless you know that the target selection is going to be good. because if you make mistakes with target selection, there's serious cost to that, right? When they blow up the school in Iran, there's a huge political cost to having bad target selection. All of this, there's this dialectic about precision weapons, right? The importance of precision weapons is to not have collateral damage that people can use against you in war propaganda. So there is therefore a need for a high level of precision. And so if you can't trust the thing to be precise, then you will have some level of stopgap between the thing recommending the target and the selection of the target. But if the thing gets so good that it does actually give you the targets that you want and doesn't make any mistakes, well, then it would be fine. But then it would be fine. It would give you exactly the targets you want, not make any mistakes. You'd have goal alignment and you wouldn't care.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've killed more civilians and non-combatants since the dawn of precision weapons than we have before them. Like,
no, you can't say that,
okay.
man.
You're
nuclear
right,
weapons.
You're right.
Dresden.
But okay, you're right about that. But in the era of the precision guided warhead, it doesn't seem to be the case that we've seen the benefit of the precision missile. Like
in terms of accomplishing geostrategic ends, part of what is happening is that there's a new set of ends that states can now consider trying to accomplish because they're not quite sure yet, like just how capable they are. One of the dangerous things is anytime you have new military technology, there are theories about how effective it is, but you don't know how effective it is until you try. And then if you have success, then you'll overestimate and then you'll try it somewhere else where it doesn't work. So you go through these periods when there's change in the military technology where you haven't yet established well-tested and tried military doctrines. And during that period, you get adventurism, where people do things that are often stupid and don't work out. And yet, if you don't go through a period like that, then you don't develop new military technology and you become retrograde and backward and uncompetitive. So you necessarily, to remain militarily competitive, have to develop technology which will prompt stupidity and hubris on your own part. At a macro level, it remains rational to create periods in which you are stupid and don't know what you're doing.
That's interesting, the stupidity of it all. But yeah, it's like on the job training. And it's also this moment where we realize we are in fact being used by the tools. We and the tools being this kind of totalized logic that expresses itself in geothermo nuclear war or whatever what's the
the corporations that make the decisions, that we can't own any of the decisions that states make. There's no one who feels they can straightforwardly own the decisions that states make. When Harry Truman says the buck stops here, he's kind of deceiving himself as well as everybody else. Every decision that states make is the product of an enormous number of inputs that can't be fully comprehended by any particular person, no matter how prominent they might seem in the state machine. And the same is true for AI, right? It's a bunch of human inputs in terms of a bunch of human text that it's drawing on, and these inputs are like votes in an election, or they're like purchasing decisions in a market. They are human, and there is this dependence on the human to produce the inputs. But once the inputs are in, then you'll get decisions that nobody can really own. And the only way that you can make everybody happy with this is to legitimate this as the natural way to make decisions, and to say that when humans make decisions, something deeply evil and arbitrary is taking place. Because you haven't put it through the machine, which adjudicates the preferences. It mathematically sums them up. Right? Yeah. If it's not an election, if it's not a market, if it's not an algorithm, and it's just a person making a decision, that's totally arbitrary. That person's input wasn't put into a fair machine with all the other input. So it gets legitimated.
It does seem to be the case that we're maybe approaching a point in time where we can we can safely make seemingly arbitrary decisions. I don't know. There's something in technology that it does extend us and expand our reach and multiply our actual power as far as effectiveness in the world. And we don't need to identify with a nation. We don't need to identify with a state. We don't need to identify with a corporation. We can finally own our own activity, our own choices, our own guilt, our own complicity. And maybe not now. I don't think that's possible yet. But I think that for me, that's like my fantasy vision of the future is the world in which, as some dumbass libertarians will say, I think everybody should have the right to own a nuclear warhead. I mean, I think that's a very dumb way to say, I think everybody should be able to own their choices and own their decisions and own their activity and understand that you're guilty or you're implicit in the world around you. And it's things like states and nations and corporations and religions and identity categories and all these things that, yes, they mediate, but they also serve as disavowal, and they also serve of a ritual cleansing of our guilt, of our implication.
This is why I like to say that libertarians are autocrats,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because the autos is the self. The libertarian wants all power to come from the self. So the libertarians are autocrats in a very Greek, very ancient way of using that term. They want autos to have kratos.
Mm. So I think one thing, I don't know, now we're talking about power, effectiveness, politics. What even is politics? One thing for me, from my perspective, as someone who I largely don't feel invested in politics, outside of like local affairs, like I don't really care who's running as a Democrat or DSA person or a Republican or whatever. But I do watch it. It's all theater to me. It's all entertainment. It's all like, okay, let's see what's playing on Bread and Circus. Turn it on. And there's like people like Cenk Uygur or Uyghur, I don't know, and Anna Kasparian. I think they're progressive social democrats or whatever. I think some people on the left really hate them. I think some people on the left maybe used to really like them and maybe not so much anymore, but I don't know. But they've also said things to me, or they've also said things that to me, it almost sounds like they'd be open to working with someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Tucker Carlson, talking about, well, let's reach across the aisle and let's do some kind of, and I don't know if they've ever explicitly said populist politics or populist movement. But they talk about, well, we're trying to appeal to the average everyday person. So we should work with a Marjorie Taylor Greene or a Tucker Carlson or one of these other figures who has distanced themselves from the Trump administration and maybe even the mainline Republican administration or whatever. And I don't know how I feel about that. And I also don't know what that means. I don't know if anyone else takes that seriously.
Yeah. There's always a projection of who is this mythical everyday person? Yeah. One of the things that has disappeared is, median voter theory. Because there isn't a median voter anymore. The electoral strategy of the parties is not to win over the median voter who sometimes votes Republican and other times Democrats. The strategy of the parties is to activate the fringe voter who will maybe vote for one party, never the other, and sometimes will vote for third party or stay at home. It's to get that person off their butt and to do things. How do you poke them? How do you prompt them? How do you terrify them into showing up? That's become the strategy. So I think that part of what has happened is that there isn't really any kind of everyday person, but a lot of people's political theories posit this as a necessary thing that has to exist somewhere, even if it's less accessible to them. And so rather than admit that this person no longer exists, there is a tendency to continuously invent new kinds of social scientific research techniques to try to locate this person. But the fact that you have to use social science techniques to find the person itself indicates that there is no common sense. If there was common sense, you would already know what this person thinks, and you wouldn't have to use social science because you would be this person. Most of us would be this person. It's always somebody positing themselves as, well, of course, I'm not a normie, but the normies out there are normies who do exist. And if I could just figure out what the normies think, and find a way to consistently have takes that line up with normie takes, then I would suddenly become like a god. That's the way that it works. And each individual influencer has this dream that they'll find out what normies think and become the god. In The Way Is Shut, this is the Aragorn figure, the musically political person who thinks, okay, nobody else can figure out how to unite everybody, but I'm special and different. I'm Aragorn, and I have this cool sword, and so therefore, people will answer to me because I've got the special sauce. That's what I see political influencers as doing. When really, even if you have some number of millions of followers, you do not have the normies. You don't have the median voter or the average person. You have this idiosyncratic batch of several million people in a country that has 300 and almost 50 million people. You can have 30 million regular viewers. You do not have the normal person, the average person. You have a weird 30 million people who are not representative of the 350.
I like that a lot, and yeah, I think I agree wholeheartedly. Much like the Gulf War did not take place, the median
That's
voter
exactly
does not
where I was going with it. The normie did not take place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're right about that. But it feels different. Am I just falling for it? Like, am I, even though I try to maintain my distance and try to say, oh, I don't fucking care about that. It does seem to be the case that, like, when Nick Fuentes goes on and tells everyone to vote Democrat, like that feels like something. And it feels like something.
There's fracturing. There is definitely fracturing going on. The thing is that this fracturing is always going on, and one part of the political spectrum or another, because whoever's doing stuff is ticking off people who used to be their friends. Whoever's doing stuff, every time you concretize what you are into something in particular, there's only going to be a relatively small constituency of the population that's going to be really excited about that thing. And large numbers of other people who voted for you are going to go, really? That's what this is about? Really? You're going to put Elon Musk in charge of the government? I didn't think you were going to do that. I thought you were just taking his money. There's always going to be, large parts of the coalition that respond that way. So what has happened is we're now going into the midterm year. There's all sorts of discontent. Also, a lot of people are voicing their discontent to try to have influence with the administration in the midterm year. So each of these guys has their little fief of, dedicated, whether it's a couple 100,000 or a couple million or 10 million or however many people. And each of them thinks, I am leading this group of people. Okay. And I will refuse to support the party if the party doesn't make certain concessions to me. And these people who are loyal to me, they imagine, even though these people probably watch several other influencers who differ from them substantially in all kinds of ways. And as soon as people realize that their viewers watch other people that they don't like, they flip out about it and become very upset. How dare you people watch my competing, YouTube channel? And then they make content ripping on that channel and trying to prevent their viewers from watching this very dangerous competing channel. Narcissism of small differences. Right. But what they are doing in the election year is trying to get the party to think that they speak for this audience and then make concessions to them as an individual, as a brilliant genius leading individual. Right. And one of the ways in which Nick Fuentes does that is by flirting with the Democrats, including having, Hunter Biden, doing a show with Hunter Biden.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that.
Right. But ultimately, the midterm election will come and go, and whether or not Trump is able to compete in that midterm election will have a lot more to do with the overall performance of the economy, because the economy still has the ability to upset people across a lot of difference. If you have a high cost of living, you could still upset lots of people across a lot of difference. The problem is you can't run competitive political parties purely on the basis of the economy. It's not possible to do that. The Bernie Sanders thing was this, attempt that I thought at the time was quite valiant in 2016 to make the economy the center of things on the basis that maybe there is still a common moral sensibility in relation to things like wages and healthcare and higher education and so on and so forth. But there wasn't. There wasn't. And we tried to use the internet to construct it. And many people, developed influencer skills to do this and really, made podcasts and tried to think about how do you say the right thing on the podcast to help make this thing happen. It couldn't be done. And that was even with the stuff that has the most purchase, the stuff that affects the largest number of different kinds of constituencies. What happened is, people say, oh, the right stopped it. Well, what did Hillary Clinton do? What did the right do? They just talked about some of the issues that people care about on which they disagreed. They raised the profile of wedge issues, and then the coalition split apart of its own accord because it cared more about those wedge issues. Each of the parts cared more about some wedge issues than it did about the things that had been used to unite them together. And the people who were uniting them together said, don't worry about those wedge issues. They're just culture war issues. They don't really matter. That didn't work. That didn't put them back together at all. Why? Because they actually care about culture war issues. They genuinely do. And people take that lesson and go, aha, there's all of these people out there who have culture war positions we don't agree with. So maybe we just need to have a left politics which is culturally moderate or a left politics which is culturally conservative or something. But there is no unified people that you can make out of that either. That's just another way to construct another fragile partial coalition, which ultimately will not survive a stress test.
So the way is shut.
Yes, the way is shut. That's been my whole shtick for years.
I mean, I think, and as much as, I mean, to me particularly, it matters because I spend my time writing silly science fiction stories about the robots taking over. And so I don't want to, I don't want to poo-poo that idea because but I think it's telling that we, or at least myself, will spend time wondering whether or not the robots are going to take over when it seems to be the case already that the robots have taken over. They're just not wearing bodies. It's this logic. It's this kind of global deadlock that we're trapped in with where the way is shut. The way is forced shut by this logic that kind of, it doesn't just condition, it really does determine what is possible within the existing framework that we're operating inside. I do think that already is the AI apocalypse.
Yeah, the states and corporations, I think already, the modern state, as conceived by Hobbes, is already AI. And we can make it more AI. We can make it something that's harder to challenge and rebel against. But I think you could frame all of the social movements of modernity as so many human rebellions against Hobbes's machine. Hobbes's machine will now acquire new machine tools. That's what Hobbes's machine always does in response to pressure from the people. It requires new machine tools and gets stronger and more powerful and harder to even comprehend, let alone meaningfully resist through, silly monkey things like social organizing.
Mm. Oh, man.
Is it possible to kill Goliath with a stone?
There's so many movies that, take that as the premise. Sci-fi movies where you just have to push the off button on the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it will change things. States and corporations have changed our world enormously over the period of time in which they've been the dominant actors. They make huge changes, and the competitive struggle among them does have directionality of varying kinds and types. It's not like things are going to be the same forever. It's just if you're insistent that it's got to be social and political organizing of a historical type, and if that's the only way anything can change in a way that's morally acceptable, then life will seem to be very miserable and depressing. But you could be in despair about the political and still be open to the possibility of new stuff happening.
Yeah.
Can I, okay, I just want to ask this before we run out of time and I forget. I just want to ask the most basic prediction from you and see where you think about this. Okay, so last week Trump was, the fear that liberals and leftists have had is that Trump will not go silently into the night. He will want a third term. Well, he was joking about it last week about sticking around for a third term and that he'll be running in 2028 and yeah. What do you think about this, Benjamin? Will he actually leave and it won't be a problem? Will he think this is so unfair? There's no reason I can't have a third term. Let's think this through. So will Trump want a third term, and will AOC be the Democratic nominee?
So I think if Trump was trying to get a third term, it would look a lot like the current argument about the SAVE Act. Something which isn't going to pass, even though Trump really would like it to pass. He'd really like that SAVE Act to happen, but it's not going to happen because everybody knows that because he's associated with challenging the integrity of the elections, any reforms to the electoral system that are associated with him will be delegitimating on the next election. And so they won't actually perform the function. Republicans who do support some level of reform, they still want that reform to actually have the function of legitimating the elections. And if the reforms are associated with someone who has no credibility on the issue with large parts of the public, then they can't possibly perform that function. In the same way, if he was trying to run for a third term, he would be denying other people in the party their opportunity to potentially be president. Those people have no interest in facilitating his doing that. He would be going, come on, wouldn't this be cool and fun? Wouldn't it be great if we did this? And they won't really be very interested in that. The other thing to bear in mind is that, it would be one thing if he was 20 years younger or even 10 years younger, but he's really, really, really old. Yeah. Really old. He's going to be an octogenarian by that point. It's going to be really implausible by then. Really implausible electorally. It's not in the party's interest to do it. So it's not just that it's not in the individual career interest. It's not the party interest.
I have 50 years left in me. I've eaten nothing but McDonald's my entire adult life. And that's the trick. You've all been lied to. And you can basically consider me immortal at this point. I will never stop. I'm the Energizer Bunny.
Him and RFK are going to live forever. I think he's a lame dunk. I do think he's fading, not just from his term being up, but I think he's not long for this world. He looks like shit. I don't think he'll survive.
Okay, so will AOC be the nominee?
I don't think so. Having watched what has gone on in Britain in relation to the Ed Miliband net zero thing, Ed Miliband had a much stronger position within the Labour Party in terms of he had lots and lots of support. He used to be leader of the party. He has loads of friends. There's loads of people who like him. He had already been appointed the Secretary of Energy and Net Zero. And yet when Andy Burnham came in, despite the fact that Andy Burnham is a close personal friend of his and has been a friend of his for a long time, there was such an uproar about making Ed Miliband Chancellor of the Exchequer, purely on the basis that Ed Miliband would direct too much investment toward green technology at the expense of keeping energy cheap immediately today for AI and for defense contractors. Purely on that basis. And Tony Blair, who is not well liked and is an antique figure, wrote this long op-ed criticizing Starmer and implicitly Ed Miliband for prioritizing net zero over AI and over maintaining a competitive economy and over making investments in defense to meet the NATO defense spending target. Even though Tony Blair is not popular and not well liked, and even though Ed Miliband is very strong inside the Labour Party and in terms of MPs, in terms of connections to Labour Party interest groups, he couldn't be chancellor. And ultimately, not only could he not be chancellor, Andy Burnham had to pick John Healey, who resigned as the Minister of Defense on the grounds that the Starmer government was not investing enough in defense. So he not only couldn't pick Miliband, he had to counter signal by picking Healey. So what that says to me is that AOC, who doesn't have anything like the same level of strength inside the party, who is associated with who's running in the United States. So it's not like the defense contractors and the AI companies are native British companies. They're mostly American companies. Nevertheless, the demand was that Britain appease those companies. The home power base of those companies is the United States. And they have loads and loads of Democrats to choose from who are very technophile, who are abundance, narrative oriented, who they have a long history of being able to work with successfully. I'm not sure who the nominee is going to be, but I have said and will continue to say, I am quite confident it will not be either AOC because of her unacceptability to tech companies, or Harris, because Harris does not have the political skills to win a competitive Democratic primary election. So that's not to say that it'll be Newsom. I think there's an opportunity for somebody else. Newsom hasn't polled well enough to get ahead of Harris yet. And I think anybody who trails Harris is weak. If Harris is leading and you're in a poll against Harris and you can't beat Harris, even out this far, that's not a great sign for your viability in a competitive primary election. I'm quite confident that Harris will not win, and I think that everybody who polls beneath Harris will lose too. So my thought is that someone who isn't currently included in a lot of polling will be the nominee, but we'll see.
I'm going to vote for Harambe again. I mean, we talked a bit about AI. I wonder, Mikey, if you want to bring up that potentially hot button question, because it rhymes with AI. When people talk about AI in the future, they talk about cybernetic. They talk about biological collapse, biodiversity,
transhumanism,
this and that, and nanotechnology and engineering at the human level, transhumanism, all these things. Some people are doomers about it. Some people are utopian about it. Some people are just trying to live their life and do their job and take care of their family and make sure all their needs are met. And they don't have time to decide if they think we're all doomed or we're all gonna figure it out someday. Nevertheless, they're all kind of popular topics. And transhumanism is, it's very much a kind of mainstream topic of conversation, but there's a darker side of transhumanism
there's a darker side to AI and transhumanism. And I think some of the guys on the right are tapped into this. And I think, when I say the word, it's one of those words that people go, oh shoot, that word. But this last week I've been thinking through it. And look, when you're a theorist, a philosopher, whatever, there's moments where you step back and you go, okay, I've always been against that, but why am I against it? Like, can I actually, even to myself, or is it just something I was taught to be against? And I mean, I'm against it after thinking it through this week, but I had to kind of start from a 0 point and go, okay, let me actually start thinking this through for myself, because I don't think I ever have. I've just relied on, I don't know, some sort of leftist big other. Like, oh yeah, it's a default position of mine. Eugenics. Right. So why is eugenics bad? Why is it a problem? Right now, there's obviously certain default answers typical leftists would give you. But when you start moving in this direction of AI, transhumanism, there's a eugenic component to this trajectory, which is AI going to select what it considers to be the best humans for certain roles, certain positions in society?
Hyper racism.
Will say what?
Hyper racism. Short little blog post.
Hyper racism, right? Which is this famous piece Nick Land wrote, where the racism becomes actually those who are augmented. I know there's this way you and I want to talk about us humans always being cyborgs, but this is meant in a different sense, right? That there will be technologically modified humans. They will not be whatever we are, they won't be it. They will have transcended it via tech. This is a new type of racism, the racism against the unmodified, right? So I guess I want to start just with kind of the naive question that, you start philosophical lines of inquiry with. Why is, I mean, why do we all consider eugenics to be this evil thing? Is it just because of the different political parties it's been associated with? There's some naive aspect of it where it's not bad. It's just trying to get the best out of humanity. What's the problem with it? What's the issue with eugenics, guys?
There's a part of me that maybe taking up this spirit of naivete, where I want to say, what's the difference between eugenics and fluoride in the water? Didn't we put fluoride in the water to improve dental hygiene, to improve not just quality of life, but also longevity of life? And isn't that actually a good thing? And I do. My sister's a dental hygienist, and we've had lots of conversations. I do think dental hygiene is one of the major technological revolutions that allowed humans to kind of surpass our dozen or so year lifespan of normal apes. Like, because dental hygiene is connected to your entire body. So if you got something funky going on up here, it's going to screw you up. But obviously I'm being hyperbolic and sensational and silly, but there is a part of me. What is it that separates eugenics from technological advancements in healthcare? What is it that separates eugenics from germ theory and understanding that you have to wash your hands? If you do an autopsy and then you go deliver a baby, you have to wash your hands because there's this thing called germs, and the guy that discovered that was considered a madman. But here we are 2 centuries later, we take it all for granted. Germs are real. Healthcare is a real thing. I recently did a little solo episode talking about healthcare and Illich. I do think the healthcare industry needs to be criticized and interrogated. But I do think it's worth asking the question, what's the difference between eugenics and hygienics? And I think it's the kind of the political application of that. And I think in the world we live in today, healthcare or hygienics, just to be fun, is already being applied in a stupid, idiotic, instrumental way. And I think the poor people suffer from the healthcare system. Whereas eugenics, I think it's, I don't know, is it inherently racist? I think probably most times it's been applied. I think it has been explicitly racist. Maybe. I don't even know. I guess my answer to you, Mikey, is that's a good fucking question. And I don't know.
Benjamin?
So I think when you say eugenics, people typically think you mean negative eugenics, as in killing the unfit people so that only the fit people can reproduce. And people are opposed to killing the unfit people so that only the fit people can reproduce. Of course, historically, before World War II, eugenics meant a lot of other things. In addition to that, eugenics could just mean trying to ensure that people who had good traits or complementary traits were able to reproduce, or to try in some way to influence who reproduced with whom so as to get certain kinds of traits. And this could involve positive inducement. It could involve systems. It often involved people, drawing on the part of Plato's Republic, where he talks about calculating the births, and this idea that you could, try in some way to produce more regularly parts of the population who had the skills that you needed through positive incentives. In the 20s and 30s, before World War II and before the Holocaust, broad parts of liberalism were interested in eugenics. In general, modern political theory was very interested in eugenics. It received a rebrand in recent decades as transhumanism. Transhumanism, of course, means trying to overcome the limitations of the human. And that's what eugenics is ultimately about as well. It's about trying to overcome the limitations of human beings. Now, I think that insofar as eugenics is a bad thing, or insofar as transhumanism is a bad thing, it would be that transhumanism and eugenics is often support for it is often motivated by Gnosticism. So Gnosticism being a hatred of being, a hatred of existence, and a belief that existence is evil and needs to be in some way machined away or machined over, that it's not good to be human, that human beings are bad and evil on some level and need to self-abolish as human beings. I am not a Gnostic. I think Gnosticism is a kind of heresy that stems from a misreading of Platonism. So I would call it a Platonic heresy rather than proper Platonism. And many people often conflate the two together and treat Platonism as if it were just Gnosticism, which I think is a mistake. I think that if you have an attitude toward transhumanism or to certain applications of what might be called eugenics that isn't motivated by Gnosticism, but has other positive humanistic motivations, then you might be talking about something more defensible. But to do this, you have to break down, what does somebody mean? What are they really talking about? I noticed in the interview that Peter Thiel had on Ross Douthat's show, he's just been picked up by 60 Minutes. He's leaving the New York Times for 60 Minutes.
Wow.
Yeah, Ross Douthat. But in his interview that was still done for the New York Times, and which you can find on YouTube with Peter Thiel, they got into this question about whether Peter Thiel's transhumanism is a kind of Gnostic heresy. And I think that it's difficult to argue that Peter Thiel's version of Christianity is not Gnosticism. If you have a Gnostic position, then that's going to lead to quite anti-human attitudes. And I think one of the things people have noticed about Thiel and some of these other guys is that they do seem to have the attitude that human beings are bad and need to be overcome or need to be abolished. If the human is bad, if the human is a source of evil, rather than just something lacking or imperfect or incomplete, then I think you move into the Gnosticism territory, and then the transhumanism or the eugenics doesn't have a sufficiently positive motivation. It's motivated by hatred of human beings. And then I think at that point, it becomes something that definitely ought to be opposed.
I like that a lot. I think that's a powerful statement. I really do, because I do think it shows you something to be naive and ask, what's the problem with eugenics? What's the problem with transhumanism? And I think that same question should be applied to the modern day world that we live in. What's the problem with the world that we live in today? It feels very wrong. And I think the fact that it feels very wrong, a lot of people find themselves doing lots of different things to try to make up for the fact that the world we live in just feels wrong. And someone comes along and offers them an easy answer, for like Steve Bannon and all the populist bullshit that he slings or slung on the internet, and all the deleterious effects. Because I mean, I really do think that online violence and like nihilistic violence and like a lot of crazy shit is a direct consequence of the kind of populism that supports just the churn. Like, we're all just utility. We're all just exchange value at the end of the day. Attention, extract. The human has been sucked dry of all that makes it human. And so we find ourselves doing very strange things. And it's supported ideologically by things like this kind of populism. But rather than naively asking the question, like, what's wrong with the world today? And maybe it's not entirely wrong. And in fact, maybe there are some parts of it that are actually good. And in fact, maybe there are some things that are wrong with it that are constitutively wrong, or they're wrong in this way that's actually productive. So it's not that it's evil. It is that it's lacking. And it's, hey, lack is it's an opportunity of freedom. It's an opportunity for us to be humans.
Yeah, flaws are opportunities for growth. Imperfections are things you can work on. You know, the human condition is something imperfect and flawed, full of mistakes that we can work on. But if you instead regard it as evil,
yes,
and I think it's very easy for people to slip into going, people are just evil. There is no good part of the soul. There's just a constant desire for recognition and status and honor, and then a constant desire for goodies and consumer baubles and hedonism. And I think particularly tech companies tech CEOs who sell enormous amounts of recognition and pleasurable goodies to people tend to regard their customers this way, as grabby little apes who want their likes and want their baubles, and then complain about these companies that are trying to go to space and do, worthwhile and interesting things with human talent. That's how I think a lot of the tech CEOs regard ordinary people. And if you think in that kind of way, it becomes very easy to say that people ought to be regarded as objects, as pure consumers, as envious, grubby little monkeys. And once you move into that kind of view, it becomes very easy to say, why should we have them? Why should there be so many of them? They certainly shouldn't be in charge. And I think that is the kind of default view that a lot of those guys have. Now, to be fair to them, I don't think that they fell out of a coconut tree with that. I think that comes out of their experience of capitalism. The kind of life that they're having in capitalism invites them to regard people as customers of entities like Facebook and Twitter. What do the customers of these sites do? They say horrible things to each other continuously so that they can get dopamine rushes from likes and retweets. The customers of these entities, what do people type into these LLM chats? What's the training data? What do people say? If you're stuck having to look at metadata about how do people interact with Chat GPT or Gemini, it'd be very easy to develop a very negative view of the customer. Especially people are rude to these things. People look to waste their energy, waste money by talking to these things. I've seen some people, on social media promote just engaging these things in dumb conversations as a way of wasting rich people's money by forcing them to burn energy on stupid conversations, use extra words in your answers, ways of trying to subtly through your consumption, hurt the bottom line in some way of these people, make them pay a price for the world that they're building. There's all kinds of nasty stuff that goes around. And these guys become embittered, especially when they get involved in politics and put themselves out in front of the public and then become terribly hated people with horrible favorability ratings, much lower than that of many people they've interacted with and think are stupid and don't respect. So I understand coming to that kind of view, but I do think it's a deeply mistaken perspective that comes out of capitalism, and which we ought to change the system to not generate that kind of view about people. When we have people who are developing Gnostic attitudes, it's because we have a very flawed system that forces people to continuously confront the worst aspects of human beings over and over and over again for years until this is all they can see of the human.
So, okay. You guys tell me if you think I'm right here in my criticisms. After the few days of thinking about it, I mean, one thing I dislike is that I think it divides people into two camps of substances, which are the people over here who have desirable traits and those who have undesirable traits. I think that is just too. I mean, that's such a silly way to divide all human beings into two camps. On the basis of what? What you find to be desirable traits, and so you impose that. And I can't help but, I mean, I see certain psychoanalytic dynamics here. When you substantialize people like this, you act like, oh, this group has desirable traits, this one has undesirable. Like, both have both. And nobody is fully consistent with themselves. To use the older term, it's almost like there's a form of essentialism going on here. That doesn't recognize the plasticity of human beings as groups and as individuals. That just because somebody has a desirable trait now doesn't mean they'll always have that trait. Now, if you try to do this at the genetic level, and genetics is your ultimate criterion for deciding this shit, I just think this type of reductionism, though the human is their genes, oh, the human is their IQ score. I just have never been able to see anything but like bad faith or inauthenticity in this type of identification or reductionism of the human to these things. And so, real quick, and the motivation behind this seems like one of pure inframing. Like humans only exist to be their most useful and resourceful and optimized. And God damn it, I just want to affirm waste. And I think the fantasy of eugenics is we can create the human without all of the excesses. And what I would say is those very undesirable excesses are the human.
Jude Law and is Ewan McGregor in that movie, or is it Gattaca? It's Jude Law and I can't remember the other guy. But yeah, I think Gattaca shows us why eugenics sucks, and because it does do that, it totalizes humans, as if your genetic code is you, as if the subject can be reduced down to the
your whole
code.
life is just your genetics.
Yeah, like it's an entirely inframed way to look at it. It's totalization, it's instrumentalization, it
capitalistic
it
calculation.
Yeah. Now I think when it's happening for like explicitly racist reasons, I think it is maybe qualitatively different from this other type of economic eugenics. I think they're both. I mean, the one that's happening for racist reasons is obviously, I disagree with that, because I do think racism is dumb. However, it is true that I had children with someone who I consciously and explicitly thought it would be good to have children with, but I'm also sure there was something else going on where I thought, oh, she looks strong and I will have strong, virile children who will go on to carry my genes into the future. So like, this is why I think it's important to ask the question about healthcare as well, because it like the bright side of eugenics as transhumanism, or eugenics as the dark side of transhumanism. I'm all for it. I am all for it. If you want to go off and you want to genetically modify yourself to have a television in your chest or some other dumb, useless thing, feel free, go for it. I want you to be able to do that. And I think that's like the same species of endeavor as healthcare, as transhumanism, as using language itself, because it is augmenting ourselves and it is a type of freedom. But when it gets hijacked in this totalized framework for inframing, for capital, for use value, or when it's kind of used in this other way that aims at a demos or aims at the myth of a unified, harmonious whole, we are all white people, therefore we will all have white babies, like that type of eugenics. I think it's bad too. But again, it's eugenics, transhumanism. You're really asking the question of technology at the end of the day. And eugenics.
One of the things, oh, sorry, Nance, I don't mean to cut you off. But one of the things Mikey raised is Manichaeanism, right? A good bad dichotomy and putting people into boxes of good or bad on the basis of their nature.
Benjamin, you mean like separating the wheat from the chaff?
Yeah. I think also Manichaeanism is a bad way to think about the cosmos, and another mistake. I do want to consider, though, I think there is, obviously I reject also, any kind of racialized theory of that. That would not be of any interest. I don't think that that's a credible way to think about human beings. The strong case for transhumanism or eugenics is something like, say there's a genetic condition that causes babies to suffer terribly and then die. But you can remove this genetic condition. It's a genetic condition that you can find, and then you can remove it, and then the babies will be born without this condition, and they will not suffer and die. So in that kind of case, you're making an intervention, which is about alleviating the suffering of the human in a way which isn't about trying to negate the human, but is based in love of the human and a desire to affirm it in some way, and say, this person matters. They shouldn't be born into the world in terrible suffering. I think it's hard to argue against that strong case because in that case, it's not motivated by Gnosticism or Manichaeanism or anti-humanism or nihilism or something like that. Or racism. And so there's ways of talking about interventions that are undeniably transhumanist. And I think all transhumanism is in some sense eugenicist.
Yeah.
I would regard that as a eugenic intervention. It just might be a eugenic intervention that somebody might plausibly support. And I think that the kind of opposition to eugenics or to transhumanism is often too fast. There's not enough questions about what is it in the service of, what is the worldview that is driving it? Because there's a lot of different types of metaphysical positions that I would disagree with that can produce very negative forms of eugenics and transhumanism. But there are also ways of engaging in modification of the body that I don't think are necessarily Gnostic or Manichaean.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with, because somebody could say, well, isn't eugenics just trying to make humanity as good as it can be? And that's where you have to start really sorting through that with nuance, because there's so much that can be packed inside of that. Not all of it negative or threatening or, simply put, fucked up. But I think they shroud a lot of what is dangerous in it by just talking about, this lofty, the humanity at its best. And for me, again, I think when it comes to those, like, oh, good, they won't be around, or those traits won't be around. I always want to say, I don't even like to talk of traits half the time, because you're reducing a human person to a set of traits.
Yeah.
And it's very convenient to talk about, well, a bad trait. Okay, yeah, we can all agree that there's traits that are bad. The person, where this affects humans, right? And so my only thing is, I think we all have this split inside of us. I think we're all subjects of death drive and jouissance and self-undermining. And I think this split into two, like, one good substance, one bad substance, is just a projection onto other people of our own excesses that we wish we could be rid of. And we tell ourselves we can be rid of if we get rid of them. And I just want to say, guys, the undesirable traits are always already in you. And so, in this sense, the perfection of humanity is the annihilation of humanity.
Yeah.
Mikey, I think you've introduced a third bad reason to do eugenics. So in addition to Gnosticism, generalized hatred of humanity, Manichaeanism, hatred of some part of humanity, in which you put all of the bad stuff, you also raised, I think, Stoic understandings of the good that are extremely rigid and fixed conceptualizations that are not open to revision, not open to philosophical development, and which are based on a particular constellation, which has been naturalized. So to give a very basic example, if you suddenly gave eugenic technology to the Romans would say, we want people who can wield the gladius. We need men who are strong and good at stabbing and marching and good at the gladius, and men who are really skinny and starve to death quickly, who are, egghead intellectuals but can't run around with the gladius. This is not a very useful kind of person, and they shouldn't be reproducing. The notion of virtue, manliness, would include, in a Roman context, being able to run around and stab people with the gladius. Now, that's not to say that the Romans are bad people for thinking like that. They're in a context where it's kind of relevant whether men can run around and stab people with the gladius, right? And in the same way, in our society, there are certain types of behaviors or qualities which seem very valuable and would seem to be good from our point of view that might not be so important later. And conversely, there are things that perhaps we devalue that subsequently could become important. And one of the things people ridicule all the time is people who are good at consuming. People who are expensive consumers who find ways to waste enormous amounts of resources on stuff that other people consider unimportant. These people would be major liabilities in a more archaic kind of society, but these people contribute enormously to capitalism, and the fact that they're around, means that there are people who will find ways to buy all of these plastic toys and baubles that you look at them and I go, how could anybody want this stuff? And a lot of eugenicists say they want to get rid of all vice and get rid of all of this, but if we're in capitalism, then we need a consumer economy. And therefore, we need people who will buy seemingly useless, unimportant things. And therefore, certain vices are very socially useful. And there's that old fable of the bees, Bernard Mandeville, about all of a sudden, these historical vices have become very socially useful because they drive commercial activity, which then produces widespread prosperity, and a state needs prosperity to be able to be competitive and to defend itself. And if you have citizens who are too virtuous and too moderate and don't consume and don't spend enough money, then you won't have a sufficiently active consumer economy. You won't be able to maintain a competitive army, and you'll get conquered, actually. Having a very virtuous population will cause your state to collapse. If you move historical conditions, you will find circumstances where stuff that you previously didn't value becomes important. And all of this stuff is potentially consistent with the good if you recognize that the good is something which has to be continuously rethought, reconceptualized, understood in new ways, in new situations. But if you take it in a very stoic way, where you naturalize it and treat it as a transhistorical thing on the basis of a limited, finite historical experience, then you will get overly attached and fixated on a particular type of person, which you'll then massively over reproduce at the expense of other types of people that you might, in a couple of 100 years, need to have had.
Great point. Yeah. I mean, I think that was partly what I was getting at when I was saying it ignores the plasticity of the human. I think you're using the word revision here is incredibly helpful. And yeah, it seems to lock us into some sort of, those who on some transhistorical basis are attuned more so than the others to the production of beauty and the production of works of art and great achievements. That it's like, from what historical perspective are you actually making these value judgments, right?
Yeah, it takes a very specific kind of society before you could support large numbers of people like me and have it make any kind of sense.
There's a
I mean, like,
I was going to say there's a science fiction book called Man After Man by Dougal Dixon. He wrote several science fiction. They're weird science fiction books. They're not like novels. But Olaf Stapledon and Dougal Dixon wrote like books that cover hundreds of thousands of years, eons, and it's like deep history, deep future, and it's all speculative and it's all really fun. And Olaf Stapledon wrote Star Maker and The Last Man. They're fascinating science fiction books. But Dougal Dixon wrote After Man, and then he wrote another like a future history of evolution of animals and stuff. And then he wrote Man After Man. And it was just kind of cataloging all the horrors that man had done to himself, or that humanity had done to itself, by hoping to achieve different ideals for a given context without really understanding that given context is not the one or whatever. And so you wind up with like stupid apes, and you wind up with amphibious creatures who are always in pain. They're really, really good at one certain thing, but they're really, really good at one certain thing, and they're suffering because they can't do anything else. And they've genetically modified themselves to be to just weird, odd things. And humans we're already weird, odd things, but we're a contradictory collection of weird, odd things. And so if we develop a technology that aims to eradicate contradiction and difference, for the sake of just one of these weird, odd things, essentially unnatural, uncanny things. We are not natural. Again, the problem that we face, I think, is naturalizing, like this impulse to naturalize the human. I think that's a huge problem. I think that's a major source for a lot of horrible things that we do.
Partly what I meant by substantialize, right?
Yeah,
Turn us into a thing with a fixed essence.
But yeah, we need the room for all the difference and all the contradiction and all the diversity, and that the saccharine fucking platitude of diversity is our greatest strength. I never really understood it until I sat and thought about it, and I was like, well, actually, diversity is a pretty good thing because it allows for contradiction and it allows for real difference and incompatibility and incongruity. Some things are just not meant to be resolved. And it's because they cannot be resolved, something new is produced and you can actually move on. And that's actually a site of freedom. But this ideological fantasy of improving the human by means of eugenics or by means of indoctrination, is the school system developed to teach you to be smart and curious and wonder and ponder, or is it developed to teach you how to respond to a bell so you can be a better factory worker? The question of public education systems and the question of eugenics, I think, is ultimately the same question. We are asking the question of, like, are our tools using us? And yeah, under the current global regime, yes, our tools are using us. The way has been shut by capital or by, I don't know, whatever. I call it capital. People get mad that we anthropomorphize capital, but yeah, we've reached a deadlock.
Changing, so
yeah, that ain't changing.
Process of modernization, process of corporatization. It's capital is a process,
but it is an agent in a weird sense, insofar as it has its own motivations and incentives that it relentlessly imposes upon the world, and that everything more or less has to bend the knee to those drives. And so there's a sense where, Marxist formula, MCM prime, everything has been centered around that prime as this infinite accumulation process. And because of that, there is a weird sense where it's like there's an agent dictating what all of us do. And I mean, I always like this little thought experiment. If you zoomed out and you could actually have this perspective, if you were looking at a city and you could simultaneously have like this bird's eye view or God's eye view, but also simultaneously be very close to each individual and what they're doing, you would see that the vast majority, the commuting, what's going on throughout the day, all of it is to generate capital. And from that perspective, you go, yeah, there is like an overarching, it's like we were talking, there's no consensus anymore, but there is a like an overarching will or drive that's shaping everything that we all have to do, reluctantly so most of the time, and it's capital. So that's where I kind of don't mind thinking about it as an agent or an entity, just because
I think it's imperative. I also think I think it might be a fair, sure, maybe we can only see that retroactively, and maybe we can only see that from our strange point of view. So maybe that kind of agency does appear to us as an illusion. Sure, that's fine, but it's an integral illusion. But
it's kind of like Galen Strawson talks about self-experience. The self for Galen Strawson is an illusion, but phenomenologically, people have self-experience. Self-experience exists even if the self is an illusion. In the same way, capital has this agentic appearance. It's experienced as an agentic thing, and people are always filling that agentic category with some set of people or some group, in part because it has this phenomenological aspect of seeming to be agentic. And then the way that we typically talk about agency, it's something which has to be attached to a concrete social or political unit. We're not able to have agency that is not tied to a social or political unit in our conceptual scheme. So people are constantly filling it with agents and positing different conspiratorial elements. And it causes a lot of confusion, the fact that it has this agentic appearance, and then people are always filling that with something else that's concrete. That then leads them away from thinking about capitalism.
Well, and I also would say part of why I think of it in terms of this being an agent. Okay, so it's a virtual structure. It's this virtual logic of accumulation, right? Well, I mean, we have our virtual symbolic orders. I mean, there's the symbolic rules, the virtual rules that make the game of basketball possible. What's different about the rules that make the game of basketball possible is they don't feel like they have to impose themselves on every other activity going on in society, whereas the logic of capital always it commodifies everything. I mean, that's Marx's line and Marx and Engels' line in the Communist Manifesto, where it turns the doctor, the poet, and you know, they go down this list of different professions that get commodified, and so it's this weird virtual mechanism, but it's the great colonizer. It has to force itself in every area of life and commodify everything in its own image and likeness in a way that other, you know, isolated, you know, basketball, golf. I don't know why I'm going to all the sports examples, but, you know, these different areas of life had their own like virtual rules and protocols to follow while in them, but they didn't feel like they had to colonize all the other ones. Capital, anywhere it can, you know, overcode. I mean, DNG wouldn't like it being called that, but wherever it can over axiomize, you know, over enforce its form of logistical calculation on it takes it over. And so,
yeah, the other one would be war. War is the other thing that does that.
That's good. Yeah.
And when people get sick of capital because they haven't been able to come up with an alternative, they start going to war because war is the other thing that can compete with that. And when people get really, really ticked about capital and they don't see any positive possibility, that's when it goes, okay, you're tired of capital? Would you like war? You can vote for war. If you want it, the system will do that. It still has that option for you if you're really sick of it. And then you end up stuck in that.
Hold on, this is a perfect lead in. So one we were talking about, you know, the way is shut. There's no consensus. When I was growing up, whether somebody, you know, my mom and my best friend, his mom, you know, one's liberal, one's conservative, they could get together, still be best friends, bicker about politics, but there was some sort of consensus in the basis of their presuppositions that, you know, they were still on the same foundation while having disagreements on that foundation. What would not have made them not talk to each other for months on end was disagreeing about, I don't know, Braveheart. But now with the Odyssey, you see how the Odyssey has completely just divided people. And I just think that this moment of seeing the Odyssey and seeing how people are over this, like, this is something that to me, and maybe you can go back in history and go, oh, well, people were like this over other movies. I don't know. I just don't, I did not feel like there was this divide over Star Wars or Jurassic Park or Braveheart or whatever. And yeah, I mean, is this kind of where we're at, where, you know, a movie like The Odyssey is, you know, symptomatic of this lack of consensus?
Much like representation has taken the place of action or activity for a lot of people. Has culture war replaced actual war? I don't know.
All right. I want to say something provocative, which is that the Star Wars prequels divided regular people.
But not on
Because
political grounds, right?
Yes, on political grounds. The Star Wars prequels, yeah. There was a serious culture war that involved regular people about the Star Wars prequels because there was a real conflict between people who think that the Star Wars movies have a symbolic thing that they unite everyone together. There's a certain thing that Star Wars movies are. Every new Star Wars movie has to be one of them. And then they have this unifying effect because everyone is committed together to Star Wars. And in this way, Star Wars took the role of the nation. You know, it's the abstraction to which that's supposed to unite everybody. And then there was another set of people who said Star Wars needs to be updated. Star Wars needs to reflect what we've learned in postmodernity. It can't be this black and white, good guys, bad guys thing.
Made for modern audiences, as they like to say.
Or, you know, even postmodern audiences, right? Because you can't have this light side, dark side, Jedi, Sith, straightforward black and white morality. There's got to be gray introduced, and Luke Skywalker has to become a little bit less obviously the good guy. And also there's got to be, you know, diversity in the film and diverse casting and so on. And the dispute about the Star Wars prequels got intense enough that there were, you know, the Star Wars films
are we talking about
started
the prequels or the sequels?
Not the prequels, excuse me, the Disney sequels. The Disney sequels.
Okay, that makes. Okay,
Have I been saying prequels?
Yeah,
I mean to say Disney sequels.
Because I was like, I don't remember the prequels being.
Okay, not the prequels, but the Disney sequels.
Totally on the same page now.
Yeah.
Sorry, the Disney sequels. That is something that I think divided ordinary, regular people to a significant degree.
I
to the
agree.
point where the movies started to do badly commercially. They started to get not just review bombed by weird people on the internet, but to actually divide mainstream public opinion. And then the studios tried to hush this up and pretend that it wasn't what was occurring, and it got really ugly. The Star Wars fight got really ugly. The Odyssey has done great commercially. It's been a phenomenal commercial success. I thought that we were going to have a repeat of that kind of Star Wars Disney sequels struggle. That did not happen. The Odyssey was commercially a total success. The public in general is perfectly happy with the Odyssey. The people who are in dispute about the Odyssey are people like us who are intellectuals and have an elevated stake in canon works like the Odyssey, much more so than the bulk of the American public, who don't care at all about the specific kinds of criticisms that we're raising because they never read and never will read any translation of the Odyssey ever at any point.
But they will see the movie.
But they will see the movie and they'll judge the movie as a blockbuster movie alongside other blockbuster movies. And for them, the Odyssey is just source material for a movie in the same way that Harry Potter is source material for a movie. And the only question is whether the movie is good. And the movie could be better than the book as far as they're concerned if it meets their entertainment needs in a better way than the book does. And I guarantee you, for the vast majority of them, it does. Yeah. However, from our point of view as intellectuals, there are all kinds of serious problems with the Christopher Nolan movie, all kinds of serious problems that range from, you know, questions of whether it's a good modern adaptation if you put it next to James Joyce's Ulysses, questions of whether it's a faithful adaptation of, you know, ancient Greek culture. You know, should these, one of the questions we've been asking as weird, you know, nerd people is whether movies should actually try to give people a confrontation with ancient cultures, ancient values, ancient beliefs. Is that something that contemporary audiences are interested in or will bear? One of the things people do whenever they try to move in this direction is also move in the horror direction. So it's not just the case that these people seem a little different from you in ways that are intellectually interesting, but they try to horrify you and shock you with the otherness of them, to bludgeon you with it in a way that makes you recoil and not want anything to do with antiquity. So this is something that I've been concerned about because while I would like people to be able, in a kind of Cambridge School history of thought way, think about values that are outside our own context for the purposes of widening our notions of what's possible. If we add a bunch of horror elements to all of that to terrify people of anything that's not, you know, modern American life, that's not actually going to accomplish that end. So what I'm seeing is, on the one hand, you know, Gladiator 2 style Yeah, and Nolan's movie, I think I would put in the category of Gladiator 2 style, telling some story about contemporary American culture, but loosely through a medium which references ancient tropes and which has, in some cases, decent costumes, although people complain about the Odyssey costumes in a way that they would never have to complain about the costumes in Gladiator 2. And then conversely, people like, what's his face, the guy who did The Northman, these kinds of horror period pieces that are about making you very uncomfortable with the past. And people talked a little bit about this even in the Odyssey in terms of grayscaling everything, making the past seem foreboding and unpleasant. And then you had people going, remember, people used to make movies about the past where you could see the colors and the banners, and everything was vibrant, and no one does that anymore. And what a shame that is, that we don't get any color and we can't actually inhabit this kind of world as if it might be something like our own. I think there are interesting debates to be had about to what degree we should try to use movies to do Cambridge history of political thought stuff for the public. There's certainly a part of me that thinks that would be a cool thing to do, but is it a commercially viable thing? It's not clear to me that it is. Certainly a lot of the classicists who watched this movie took it for granted that it had to be a modern adaptation. And then, they went into it going, how does it rack up against James Joyce? How does it rack up against Circe? How does it rack up against these other kinds of books that have been written in the last 100 years, which appropriate Greek myths in a modern context? They weren't judging it in terms of, does this convey Greek concepts and notions? They took it for granted that it would be Christianized and modernized to varying degrees. But the Emily Wilson review for the London Review of Books, have you read that yet?
I've heard about it. I haven't read it.
Yeah. This is, I think, an interesting one because she waited until the movie was already a commercial success, so she couldn't possibly damage it. Lots of people would, of course, see it and wouldn't be dissuaded from seeing it on the basis of hearing about her review. But then her translation is the one that Christopher Nolan cites as having inspired his thing. So the fact that she doesn't regard it as a good modern adaptation, even though she's well known for being someone who promotes modernizing or postmodernizing ancient work with your translations, she thinks it's perfectly acceptable to modify stuff, especially in stuff that's made for a mass audience. She nonetheless felt that it didn't work at the level of a modern adaptation, and was very critical about it on those grounds, and used some very strong language in that London Review of Books piece, remarkably strong language for an academic, saying she would be embarrassed to have written any word of it even. But at the end of it, she nonetheless thanked Christopher Nolan for raising public interest in classics and in ancient texts, because the classics departments are embattled, and maybe this will result in some jobs being saved for some classicists. And of course, that's more important than the fact that it's a bad movie from her point of view. So it still includes that perfunctory thank you, but it comes out in the London Review of Books, which most people are never going to read. They might hear, a stray Hollywood Reporter, story of the translator didn't like the movie and go, wow, how strange is that? But they're not going to read that 4,000 word thing, which takes you like 20 or 30 minutes to read. And then also it came out a couple of weeks into the run of the film, where it couldn't possibly derail the opening.
Okay, so everybody I know who's seen it has thought it was a good movie and they enjoyed it. And they're not coming at it from our perspective. They're not coming at it from the perspective of, a YouTube movie critic caught up in the culture war. I mean, like Angry Joe versus Critical Drinker on this thing, and Nerdrotic, and Jeremy Johns gave it a good review. What's wrong with him? Like, there's this bickering with the YouTube film critics, and they're all caught up in the culture war side of this. And the public just basically unanimously said this was a good movie. They didn't say it's the greatest movie ever made. They just said this was a good movie. We liked it, right? Okay. Is this a moment, maybe a fleeting moment, but we just talked about, the normie did not take place. Is this the revenge of the normie? At least a moment of it where there's a flicker of a kind of cohesion in the public that just says, all you culture war fuckers, shut the fuck up. We're going to enjoy the movie, and we don't care about what any of you have to say about it.
I do think that there are still certain people, mostly older people from the 20th century, who have a certain cachet with the public on the basis of the history of producing major work that has been extremely popular with the public. And this set of people can command public attention for things, even if these people repeatedly make movies that intellectuals don't like. Christopher Nolan is, in my view, I don't like to use this term, but the apotheosis of the midwit. He is a totally uninteresting film director to me. For me, he is one of the least pleasant people to have to watch anything by. I regard Interstellar, Oppenheimer. These movies are extraordinarily superficial and deeply boring to anybody who thinks regularly. They're very interesting if you're 14. And I was around 14 for things like Inception. And of course, when I watched those things as a teenager, they hit differently. But, the fact that adults praise Christopher Nolan movies is, something that I think is sad. The fact that film critics, art critics, people who are trained feel an obligation to praise or defend Christopher Nolan movies is, I think, a very tragic sign of just how precarious people feel that they've got to praise this stuff. The classicists feel so embattled that they have to praise this movie. There's no way any of them like it. I guarantee you not a single one of them likes it. And they're going to have all sorts of different reasons for disliking it. The amazing thing about that movie is it can upset every kind of intellectual who sees it. It can tick off every single type of classicist under the sun, ranging from Emily Wilson to the hardcore people on the other side of the classics departments who like, more traditional stuff or more high modern, 19th century translations. But leaving aside academic gripes about it, he is someone who has a sustained track record of blockbuster success. And there are a few of these people who are 20th century media icon people who can make a mint and unite broad sections of the public on the basis of their history of work. What I would say is that we don't make these people anymore at scale. We're not producing new Christopher Nolans or new Madonnas or new Michael Jacksons, figures of that type. Yeah, they're becoming less and less common. Yeah, and I think it's just going to be harder and harder to make somebody like that. But we still have, because of the length of the human lifespan, large numbers of people whose media footprints were created in the 1990s or in the 2000s through these gigantic movies or gigantic television shows like Seinfeld. And certain people who are associated with these things have a kind of golden ticket from the past that will allow them to continue to fleetingly produce unity in small ways, not in such a way that you can do anything politically with it. But these people are going to become incredibly valuable economically because they're literally going to die off, and there's going to be a tiny number of them at the end. And each one of them, if they do anything, it's going to make an incredible amount of money, no matter how bad it is.
So, Benjamin, is the way to make the way open is to convince Christopher Nolan to be the Democratic nominee for president of the United States of America?
No. If he did that, if one of these people goes and tries to transfer it into politics, the reason that somebody like him can do this is that his movies can be watched by both Republicans and Democrats still. Despite everything that's happened, both Republicans and Democrats can watch that movie. And it's weird people on the internet who get upset, but it's still the case that lots of different types of Republicans and Democrats who are strange to each other can go and watch that movie. That movie is so inoffensive and contentless and so full of roller coaster theme park sounds and explosions. It has so little substantive content that it can't possibly offend anybody. It's because it's so deeply stupid, but nonetheless has been shot in such a way that it seems as if it has something to say, that people are incredibly pleased to go see it all together, and they feel a tremendous sense of togetherness watching something that has no coherent message.
So you're saying he needs to run third party?
You can't politicize it. It can't be politicized.
All right.
That leads me to, I don't know, is the Coen brothers and Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Is that a better modernization of the Odyssey than Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey?
I think there would be a strong argument for that. I think a lot of critics and classicists would think that it is. Because they would say that, yes, it deviates, but it deviates in a way which takes up its own times and its own context and has something to say. Whereas this movie doesn't have anything to say. This movie is, and insofar as it does have anything to say, it's retreads of what he already said in Oppenheimer, and he already said in Interstellar, and he already said in the Batman movies. And really what he's been doing is Batman over and over and over again. You are the super, cool, strong guy, Batman, but oh my God, you've done bad things. And now, you have to live with the things that you've done. Oh, Batman, how will you ever go on?
I did like Memento and The Prestige. And
what about The Prestige? Can you go for that? That's the one everybody.
If you saw it long enough ago as a young enough person, then you'll think it's good. If you go back and watch any of his movies now, you're not going to find that they hold up. If you are someone who has thought about any of the issues that are raised in any of these movies. If you haven't thought about any of this stuff before, and everybody is 14 once. When you're 14, there's a whole set of things you can love that are terrible, but you can love them. And if you fall in love with something when you're 14, you're going to defend it when you're 35. And even as we've found out, when you're 55 or 65 in many cases. So, there's always a new set of 14-year-olds for something like that.
So you're saying Interstellar is a better movie than 2001: A Space Odyssey?
Oh God!
Oh my goodness!
Interstellar was the last one that I, could even sit through. Really, and by the time I got to the end of it, I was just so, why is he doing all of this stupid stuff again? Why does he not grow up or learn anything or become more interesting over time? What is wrong with this guy? The thing is, if he did grow up and become more interesting, he would no longer be able to be Christopher Nolan. His movies wouldn't make money anymore in the way that they do.
All right, I guess, spoiler alert, I guess. But, okay, if the future humans, the transhumanist humans, want to help the current humans, they could, and they can build this elaborate time, space thing that he can enter, tesseract, whatever. They can't find a more efficient way to do this without him going into a black hole. Like,
I'll tell you what happened. He watched Contact, and he was just trying to impress Jodie Foster.
Well, they didn't send a poet again, so fail. So I don't know. I just always. Interstellar, I'm like, they couldn't, these super genius humans in the future couldn't find a better way to transmit this to him than this.
Because it's all
he goes to all this trouble to make it seem like it's going to be a science movie like The Martian. And then it ends with a freaking time loop, the most superficial, uninteresting sci-fi trope anybody's ever, something that was more interestingly handled in with Marty McFly
and Terminator.
Tragic. Well, of course, and Terminator, the most overdone retread time travel trope.
Benjamin, I didn't know we were going to get your epic takedown of Nolan. This was the treat of the whole discussion.
All you had to do was ask me about it. Nolan and Spielberg are, I think, the two worst hacks in American cinema. There are many other blockbuster filmmakers that I would offer qualified defenses of, but Spielberg's movies are just terrible. The recent one where
Disclosure Day.
Yeah, Disclosure Day. Oh, you reveal the truth, and then everybody gets good, and all comes together on the basis of the truth having been revealed. What a broken old man he is to have that kind of theme in a movie in 2026.
I had an idea, and I did not watch the Disclosure Day yet.
I have.
For legal purposes, I did not watch it on a streaming website where somebody recorded it with a camcorder in a theater. I did not. But no, I was the other day I sat down and I was working. So I had it on the other monitor. And yes, it was a crappy, low quality recording of the movie in the theater. And I watched the first probably half of it and I didn't finish it. And I'm sure I'll finish it at some point. And I only half watched it. Caveats, provisos aside, my initial thought with the movie opening at a professional wrestling match, I thought, oh, I wonder if this is Steven Spielberg telling us that it's all fake and it's all kayfabe and he's making a movie because people are all excited about Disclosure Day and it's a huge political thing and it fascinates me and I actually think it's really important and I think it goes right along the conversation with AI. I think it's ideology. I think it's distracting people from things that are really going on and the aliens are part of this attempt to naturalize the human and, oh, we can't have God and Jesus because, you know, we're living here in the postmodern future. So we'll have space Jesus. We'll have alien Jesus and it'll be okay. All that stuff. But there's tons of people who think Disclosure Day is brilliant, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if Spielberg was starting his movie with kayfabe to tell everybody watching it, like, you're stupid if you believe this. Now, do I think that's what Spielberg was doing? Do I think he has the self-awareness? I don't think so, but I thought maybe I would start a movie if I wanted to kind of feed the flames and make a bunch of money. I might start the movie off with obvious spectacle that's built on a lie. Kayfabe is, like, everybody knows professional wrestling is fake, and that's why people love it so much. That's why it's so important to so many people, because we're part of the production. Professional wrestling is the successful postmodern American form of art. It allows the consumer to be an active producer right along with the performers themselves. I don't think that's what Spielberg was doing. I think it would be cool if he was.
We ended up with this reheated Watergate sewage of, you know, the media will, you know, report the truth on television of all things. And then everyone will see the image on the TV and go, well, I guess that's the way that it is. So we all have to do the thing now.
Oh,
what a brain dead, totally. It's one thing to have a narrative like that in 1975. It's another thing to do that now. It's really something to still be doing that in the 2020s. But because he's Steven Spielberg, not only can he do that, it's a huge commercial success because it's Steven Spielberg.
I mean, look, in all honesty, Nance and I, we've kind of made this argument, like the last Spielberg movie is actually Jurassic Park. That's the last time that either of us, you know, and because I grew up with those movies, Benjamin, like the E.T. and the Raiders of the Lost Ark and Jaws and all that. Like, it's just my childhood. So I have this connection to them. The last time I felt like he pulled off anything like that, it was Jurassic Park, and everything since has been some faded version of himself. But I almost want to agree with Zizek here. As an adult, I would maybe want to argue the greatest movie ever made was actually The Duel, his first one.
Oh, really?
I think if you have never seen The Duel, it is so weird to watch this movie and knowing what you know about Spielberg. I really think if there's one Spielberg movie that I could see you really liking, it would be his first one. Because Zizek even says, after The Duel, it's all downhill.
I have not seen The Duel. I will have to give it a chance purely on the basis of your recommendation. And even though I hold most of his corpus in absolute contempt.
Okay, well, if you hate it, then feel free to blame me. But I do think this one will hit different than the other ones.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think it's excellent. I also don't like Christopher Nolan movies, so I think it's great. I think it's wonderful that we went there in the end. But I don't know. I guess to put a button on this conversation, is, I don't know, because we talked about movies, we talked about this, and that kind of came out of a culture war conversation. I do feel like it's all kind of a natural progression. or digression from the question of politics. And maybe that's because politics don't work anymore, or what we think of as politics is in fact not political. And I don't know. We need to take back politics from non-political issues or some. I don't know. But populism seems like the right is kind of fracturing and falling apart. It's apparent that the left has always been fractured and always fell apart. And in fact, it fell apart before it could ever even kind of come together. But it's also always been that way all along under modernity. Like the world we live in today, it's a mistake to transhistoricize and kind of think we're part of grand projects and we belong to grand historical ideas and this and that. And it's right to be, it's right to despair in the face of politics. It's right to worry. It's right to wonder if the world is falling apart. But that's not an excuse to not sit back, sit idly by, become a nihilist, or take up positions of anti-humanism and Gnosticism and all this stuff. And at the end of the day, find yourself being able to take up a position of courage in the face of hopelessness or something like that. Or if all of that is just kind of spaghetti thrown at the wall, at least that's what I take from it. And I don't know. Again, Benjamin, every time I think of something political, or I'm paying attention to influencers on the internet who present themselves as political figures, and I feel like I might be falling for it or whatever, I do think of you. And I don't know. It feels insane. I feel insane when I think about politics and when I allow myself to become immersed in the world of political influencers and stuff like that. And it does help to restore some sanity when we're able to just kind of, I don't know, spitball ideas and talk about this stuff with each other. So I appreciate it.
I appreciate that.
Me too.
Man. You know, it's great to come on and talk about this stuff. You know, I started doing the films podcast, The Lack, after 2020 and the failure of politics. And for me, the thing that we're lacking is the political. That's at the core of that. And so everybody starts making cultural content when it's obvious that the political is lacking. But what do? They pretend that the cultural content is political content. And so when we made The Lack, part of my idea was, how would you make an actual cultural show that deals with that? And for me, it would be to talk about how films are symptomatic of the absence of politics. What it is about films that show what we can't do and what's missing at that level.
Okay, as a regular listener to The Lack, just float the idea. Maybe you and Nina discuss The Duel. That would be.
I definitely have put it in my mental bank of things to do on The Lack. I will not watch The Duel and not talk about it on The Lack. If I watch it, then we'll talk about it.
Fantastic. Yeah, that one. I think you two would have a lot to say about that.
I think, dear listeners out there in TV land, thanks for spending your time here with us. We'll go ahead and get out of your hair. I don't know. Do we have any suggestions or any comments, any parting words we'd like to leave the folks at home with?
To this day, you can just still not eat the yellow snow. I think that's safe to still recommend.
Yeah.
If there's one trans historical truth,
don't eat yellow snow.
It's not that common sense is completely gone. It's that it's just become a lot thinner and it won't support a lot of weight.
And on that note, internet, we will see you on the next one. Thanks for spending your time here with us. tired of living in today's apocalyptic dystopian hellscape? Well, if you are, you're in luck. Go to worsehelp.co to get all the tasty little tips and tricks you need to survive the world we live in today. And you can even, leave comments and tell people how you feel and do all those things. So go to worsehelp.co and check it out. Now, if you hear me make the assertion that we're living in an apocalyptic dystopian hellscape and you think, whoa, hold on there, Nance. I don't know if I agree with you on this. I think it's true. The world is, fairly dystopian, fair point, but I don't think it's apocalyptic and I don't think it's a hellscape. I'm of the impression that we should, allow ourselves to be, if not optimists, then at the very least realists, and we should allow ourselves to see the silver lining on all our storm clouds. And we should always be able to tell ourselves, while it may not be great, it can always be worse. Well, if that's you, dear reader, I say to you, my response to that is poppycock, balderdash. Your so-called realism is, in my opinion, ideology, and this, optimism doubly so. I think when we do this thing, when we take this move of saying, well, it's not great, however, it could be worse, I think we're failing ourselves. I think that's bad faith. Now, I'm guilty of it all the time. In fact, that's one of my mantras in life is, it can always be worse. I say it all the fucking time. I've probably said it a dozen times in the last fucking week talking to people about things. Well, it could be worse. It could be worse. And I think that's nonsense because it's true. It can be worse. It's also true that there's no good reason things aren't better for every single one of us on this planet. We have trillions of dollars dedicated to things that are, pretty much at the end of the day, only making our lives worse. And we're just kind of caught up in it all. And all we can do is trick ourselves into this, skin of our teeth fucking mindset. If you have enough stick-to-itiveness, if you use enough elbow grease, if you fucking lace your boots up and fucking lottie-dottie whoop-de-whoop and all this stuff, you'll be all right. And that's bullshit. We're being seduced by this ideological position of it could be worse. Yeah, sure, it could be worse. However, once again, there's no fucking good reason that it isn't better. I believe the only way to properly have courage and have hope and bravely march in to the dark night of the future, the long night, is to be a pessimist, or at least come at things from a pessimistic position. See things for all they are. See things for the worst possible version of what they are. And I think that is the only way to arrive at a position of true hopefulness. Now, why do I think this? I think this, again, because we're living in a world that is conditioned and determined by economics, by exchange, not by the dignity of life, not by love, not by humanness, subjectivity, curiosity, exploration, merit, any of these things. None of these wonderful things that would be better organizing principles for the world we live in today. We're not living in that world. We're living in this world that reduces to exchange value. And I think we need to see that in the worst light. And from there, we can take up a position of courage and hope. And I think that's the only way to do it. So don't come at me with that fucking, oh, I'm a realist nonsense. Because I think if you take up this position of I'm a realist, you have fallen for the oldest trick in the book, dear friends. And it's okay, because like I said, I'm guilty of it. I do it all the time. I'm constantly checking myself because I don't want to have a negative affect. I don't want to put people off. I don't want to approach the world and treat it like a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure and badness and all this stuff. That's not what I'm saying when I'm saying take up the pessimistic position. I think the pessimistic position is allowing things to be what they are, allowing things to be the worst version of themselves, and understanding no one is coming to save us. If you want something worth having, you have to fight for it. You have to work for it. You have to do all the hard stuff. And then from there, you can realize, oh, the human is worth it all. So we do have to do all the hard work, and no one's going to swoop in. There's no Deus Ex Machina. There's nothing. There's no plot devices to come in and save us at the last moment. It is up to us, and we are very likely to fail. Nevertheless, pressing on is the courageous, hopeful thing to do, and I think you can only arrive at that by way of pessimism. So I find myself falling for the easy way out and taking the ideological route of, yeah, it's not great, but it can always be worse. It's true, it can always be worse. But that's a me problem. You know what I'm saying? If I'm out here doing this, oh, it could be worse, it could be worse, it could be worse, and I'm putting that on other people, that's bullshit. That's a me problem. You know what I'm saying? The fact that there's no good reason that it can't be better, that's an us problem. So I guess that's it. And if you're not convinced by this, then again, go to worsehelp.co, check out what's available there. You can even engage a little bit, and do all the cool stuff. So if you're a pessimist like me, go to worsehelp.co and we'll laugh about the end of the world. We'll fucking toast to each other as this city burns down. And if you're not convinced by my pessimism, well, go to worsehelp.co and check it out. And, maybe you'll engage with the ideas and see where I'm coming from, or maybe not. Maybe you'll have a convincing argument. Maybe you'll show me where I have erred. And that's fucking all good too. So fucking whoop-de-whoop, all that good shit. Check it out. Now back to our regularly scheduled programming. This product is a paid advertisement for rules and conditions apply. Do not take it if you're pregnant. Do not fucking do all that other stuff. Don't operate heavy machinery. Blah, 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 blah. Suicidal ideations may apply. Bloody diarrhea, and so on and so forth. Fuck you. Goodbye. Good night.